What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Naruto disappeared after birth and returned with the power of the stars? If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments. The sound of an infant crying could be heard through the night. A blonde child cried in the arms of his mother, who was unconscious and unable to tend to the infant. Over them stood the hero of Konoha, Minato Namikaze, Konoha's yellow flash. He smiled softly at his family who he was thankful were alive. His fight with Madara proved to be anything but easy, but in the end, he pulled through. He did find it odd that Madara suddenly ran off, but with the Kyuubi sealed in his son and his wife still breathing, he couldn't find much to complain about. Although his wished to spare his son from the curse of containing a chakra beast, he was at least grateful everyone in his family was in one piece. He called for his Anbu to recover the victims of Madara's spontaneous attack and to send them to the morgue. He watched sorrowfully as Hiruzen and his wife, Bawako Sarutobi, were taken away. The life of a shinobi was an unpredictable and dangerous profession, not only for the ninja him or herself but for their families as well. If it wasn't for Hiruzen, he would have been the one lying on the ground, dead. He summoned one of his clones and ordered it to summon a meeting with Konoha's council, clan heads and all other Jonins. The clone left with a nod and Minato shifted his gaze to Kushina. He walked over to her and picked her up with her cuddling in his arms, wary of their child. "Little Naruto," Minato said pridefully as he watched his son begin to calm down. "My son. Our son," Kushina added weakly, and Minato chuckled softly with a nod. "I'm sorry, our son," Minato said as he used Hiruishin to send the three to their home. The use of the jutsu disturbed Naruto and caused him to cry loudly. Kushina groaned. "It's your turn to deal with him." Kushina mumbled. "He's in your arms," Minato told her, and she mumbled incoherently before remaining quiet. Minato's sweat dropped. "Fine, but I'm only doing this because you gave birth to him," Minato said, and a smile appeared on Kushina's lips. "Now she hears me," Minato commented to himself as he headed for their bedroom. Somehow managing to open the door with his foot, he gently laid his wife on the bed and watched as she rolled to her side, taking Naruto with her. Kushina lay him down next to her, opening her eyes and smiling motherly as she hummed a tune and ran her fingers through his small, blonde hairs. "I thought it was my turn?" Minato teased, and Kushina giggled. "You had your chance, Daddy," Kushina taunted, and Minato smirked as he lay on the other side of the bed. Staring at his wife, he rested his head on the pillow. Just the motherly way Kushina touched her son made Minato indescribably happy. "I get a second chance, though, right mommy?" he asked with a pout, and Kushina nodded, never taking her eyes off their child. "You get no arguments from me," she answered softly, and Minato chuckled and started to do what Kushina was doing. The softness of his hair felt almost as if it wasn't real, and Minato could have sworn Naruto was smiling. "He's going to look like you," Kushina stated after a moment of silence, and Minato smiled widely. "No, he's going to have my hair, but other than that, he'll look like you," Minato said. "He'll probably act like you too," he added, and Kushina softly placed her forehead against his. "I'm sorry, Naruto-chan," Kushina said with a smile, and Minato placed a light hand on her cheek. "Why should you be sorry? With my hair and your looks, we'll need our best jutsus just to keep the girls away from him," Minato joked and received a playful hit over the head by Kushina. "What did I say?" he asked with a playful pout. "He's too young to be thinking about girls," she scowled, and Minato chuckled. "He's still my little Naru-chan. My sweet, lovable baby boy," she said lovingly as she shifted her gaze to her son again. She was too busy looking at her son to see Minato staring at her as if she grew two angel wings. "You're going to be an amazing mother to our child," he whispered, and Kushina's violet eyes connected with Minato's azure ones. "You think so?" she asked, and Minato nodded his head. "Databane," he mocked, and Kushina closed her eyes tiredly and smiled. "I'll get you for that tomorrow," she said sleepily. "Until then, rest. We have a big day tomorrow, what with the welcoming party and all," he said as he got off the bed. Kushina nodded and held Naruto close to her as they both slept silently. He kissed Naruto on the cheek and gave an innocent but loving kiss on the lips to his wife before walking out of the room and stepping into the hall. He slowly closed the door, so he wouldn't wake Kushina or Naruto up. Making hand signs, another Minato appeared, and Minato ordered it to stay to guard his family. He then walked down the hall and to the front door with much on his mind. A knock came from the door just as he opened the door and was greeted to the sight of Kakashi. "Minato-sensei." Kakashi greeted as he bowed. "Kakashi." Minato greeted and walked by. "Make it quick, I got a meeting to attend to." Minato spoke quickly and seriously and Kakashi nodded. "I wanted to see how you and Kushina are," Kakashi said just as quickly and Minato nodded his head with a thumb up. "We're fine, Naruto's great too," Minato added with a smile and Kakashi's eyes smiled. "And Sandaime-sama?" Kakashi asked and Minato stopped walking. Kakashi blinked, watching his sensei think to himself quietly and somberly. Minato slowly turned his head and stared at Kakashi with solemn eyes. "He's not with us anymore," he stated before continuing on his walk. Sadness crept into his heart and he felt his mood darken a bit. Kakashi didn't notice that Minato had continued walking without him and before long, he walked in a different direction. After a couple of minutes, Kakashi felt someone a few feet in front of him. "Kakashi Teme." Kakashi looked up and was surprised to see his best friend up so late. Minato shook off his sadness and replaced it with a stoic and serious expression and demeanor as the Hokage Tower was in sight. He went up the steps and through the hall until he stopped in front of blue double doors. He took in a deep breath and opened the door to see Homura Mitokado and Kaharu Utatane sitting behind their seats in a giant room. They were sat beside a chair that was in between them. Minato waved to the Jonin and clan heads that resided in the room as he made his way to his seat. "What's going on, Minato?" Homura asked, but Minato didn't acknowledge him, he just faced the clan heads and Jonin. "As you know, we were attacked by the Kyuubi, the nine-tailed fox." The Jonin and clan heads nodded. "The battle was difficult but in the end, it is no longer a threat to us." "You managed to kill the demon?" a random Jonin asked and Minato shook his head. "Something like the Kyuubi is too much to handle, even for me." Minato informed them and they started muttering to themselves. "However, I managed to seal it in a human container so it would not roam free." "Why don't we kill the container?" shouted another Jonin. "That way, the Kyuubi dies with it." A couple of agreeing murmurs were heard before they were all hushed by the sound of Minato's fist hitting the table in front of him and the feel of his killing intent. "No," he shouted and glared at everyone in the room. "Killing the host will not kill the Kyuubi. It will only be released and all our hard work would go to waste." He scolded. The Jonin and clan heads remained silent. "On top of that, I won't allow anyone to kill my son." Shocked gasps and looks of shock were seen and heard throughout the room. "So, what you're saying is?" Hiyashi began and Minato nodded. "That's correct, my son is the Kyuubi's container. If anyone wants to kill my son, I suggest you go through me first." He directed his gaze on every person in the room and watched as everyone averted their gaze. Minato noticed that his friends, Shikaku, Choza, Inoichi, Sume and Hiyashi seemed to support him and showed no ill will toward his son. Others, like Shibi, and majority of the Jonin seemed to be neutral on the subject. Minato's eyes narrowed when he saw a man with black hair make his way towards him. The man had short, brown hair and onyx eyes with visible creases below them. He wore the standard ninja vest, a black t-shirt with the Konoha military police force symbol, and a black cloak with white diamonds on the bottom that stops just before his ankles. His black eyes stared challengingly at Minato's blue eyes. The Kyuubi is a menace and a hazard to Konoha's safety. As leader of the Konoha military police force, I propose we keep the child locked up and under constant supervision. Fugaku Uchiha said. "I second that." Minato's eyes glared holes into the second man who spoke. Said man was Danzo, an old war hawk who was always looking for potential future root members. Minato had yet to discover the forbidden group but he had a gut feeling it was still alive somewhere. "He is my son, my wife and I defeated the Kyuubi together and helped seal it in my son. If he was a danger to the village, I would not be here," Minato assured as he glared at Fugaku and Danzo. "As you said, he is your son. So how do we know you're not lying to us just to save your son's hide?" Danzo asked. "The Kyuubi was sealed within my son. The choice was heartbreaking but I knew it had to be done. I sacrificed my son's future for this village's safety because I am the Hokage. And I won't let anything obscure my duties. I give you my word, the Kyuubi will not be let loose in Konoha," Minato declared and noticed that many of the people in the room became more relaxed. But Fukagu was about to say but was interrupted. Silence. Minato shouted, silencing everyone. The subject of my son and the Kyuubi is over. Not another word. He scanned the room and saw no one try to argue. He saw a few faces that seemed angered by the current news, but Minato knew they wouldn't dare do anything to go against him. I've got more news. His voice became solemn and harsh as he continued to speak. I know we've lost lives today, none of which can ever be replaced. However, today was the passing of an old comrade and a person who was like a grandfather to us all. Minato said, and some people immediately knew who he was talking about. Hiruzen Sarutobi, the god of shinobi, the professor, passed away. Minato said and fought back a single tear. Let us bow our head, not only to show respect to his passing but also of the others we've lost. Minato bowed his head and everyone did as well. After a few moments, he raised his head and saw others staring at him. This meeting is adjourned, he said, and many shinobi started leaving. The Ino Shika Cho walked up to him and smiled. So your son is finally born, eh? Troublesome, Shikaku said, and Minato smiled for the first time since the beginning of the meeting. Don't listen to him, having a child is a blessing, Inoichi said, and Minato nodded. Babies are expensive and they sure love to eat, Choza said, and Shikaku chuckled. No, Choza, yours just loves to eat. My kid just sleeps all the time. My troublesome wife has to wake him up just to feed him. Brad is too lazy to even wake up for food, Shikaku said, and the four started to laugh. He then looked at his other longtime friend, Inoichi. Yours probably never stops crying, am I right, Inoichi? Said man blinked as the other continued laughing. That's right, you did end up having a girl, Choza stated, and Inoichi looked away. I have nothing to be ashamed of, he said, and the others started to calm down. She will be Konoha's best kunoichi, Inoichi declared. I beg to differ. The four men turned to see Hiyashi making his way towards them. His stoic face was looking at each of them. My daughter will be born in 2 months from now. She will give your daughter more than a challenge. The 5 men became deadly silent before Minato started to laugh again. Shikaku, Choza and Inoichi followed, and Hiyashi smiled. It seems that the next generation will be an interesting group, Hiyashi stated, and they nodded. They continued to talk among themselves before Minato yawned. Damn, the yellow flash is tired, Shikaku taunted, and Minato lightly glared at him. Hopefully there won't be another attack. Minato bade them a farewell before leaving and heading home. He entered his home, dispersed his clone whose memories showed that no one tried to attack his family, and climbed into bed. He saw Kushina open a magenta eye before it closed, and she smiled. I'm home, Minato said, and Kushina nodded, feeling Minato caress her cheek. I love you, she mumbled sleepily, causing Minato's smile to widen. I love you too, he said before looking at his son. And you as well, Naruto, he added before falling asleep. Minato's eyes sprang open as his heartbeat raced and cold sweat traveled down his face. His dream. It felt so real. His heart felt heavy as the images of his dreams replayed in his head. He shook his head. Thankfully, he was forgetting some of the more gruesome details of the dreams. His cerulean eyes scanned the room and saw the still night sky from his window. However, according to his clock, dawn was nearing. He turned to see his son still sleeping soundly but his wife missing. He propped himself up and rubbed his eyes. He got off the bed and out of the room. Down the hall, he saw a light coming from the kitchen. Suddenly, his nose was assaulted by an alluring and delicious aroma. He followed it and wasn't surprised when he saw Kushina standing over the stove. Why am I not surprised? Minato said as he hugged his wife from behind. She smiled and put her left hand on top of his head. You hungry? She asked, and Minato took a deep breath. Now I am. Kushina laughed as she served herself and Minato some salt ramen. They sat down on the table and were about to eat when Naruto started crying. Minato got up but was stopped by Kushina, who placed a hand on his shoulder. It's okay, I'll get him, she said as she walked out of the kitchen. He stared longingly at the ramen as he waited for her to come back. His senses suddenly steeled and the hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. Minato! Kushina's blood-curdling scream broke the night silence. His heart pounding, Minato jumped out of his seat and ran to his bedroom to see Kushina staring fearfully at the other side of the room. He slowly turned his eyes to the other side of the room and his eyes widened. Standing near the open window was a masked man holding his crying, newborn child in one hand and a kunai in the other. To Minato, it seemed like time slowed down as the masked man brought the kunai over Naruto and stabbed him with it. His cries abruptly stopped and stock-still silence covered the room. Tears appeared on Minato's eyes while Kushina shook with dread and shock. Even under the mask, Minato could see a smile on the man's lips. With reflexes developed through years of training, Minato grabbed his three-pronged kunai from his kunai pouch and tossed it at the man who killed his son. The man turned his head to the side, avoiding the kunai. His eyes widened when Minato disappeared. Bastard! Minato grabbed the man by his collar and threw him through the window. The sound of glass breaking could be heard as the man rolled and stopped. Minato jumped out to follow him and took out 4 more kunai. He threw them and surrounded the man with them. The man looked around and saw more of the three-pronged kunai. Minato used the Hiraishin jutsu and the man found himself surrounded by yellow flashes. With a kunai in hand, Minato began to cut the man up through various angles and sides. The man rose from the attacks and when the attacks finally stopped, he headed for the ground. The man's eyes slowly opened and the last thing he saw was Minato heading for him with a blue, spiraling ball of chakra in his right hand. Rasengan! Minato shouted as he slammed the Rasengan on the man's stomach, drilling his stomach and causing the man to create a crater in the ground under him. Minato took a step back, inhaled deeply and was suddenly hit by the grief of losing his only son. He fell to his knees and tears fell from his eyes. Summoning another Rasengan, he slammed it into the ground, letting off his frustration. He was about to do it again but was stopped by a hand. He looked up, his cold, hard eyes glancing back at violet ones. "Minato-kun?" Kushina cried as she held her side with her right hand. Minato looked down and saw blood staining her white robe. H-E-I-N-N-Nar. Minato grabbed her as she fell and held her tightly. She sobbed in his chest and shook violently. Minato held her as tightly as he could and cried in her shoulder. The pain he felt was worse than any feeling he's ever felt before. He felt like he got kicked in the chest by Tsunade and found it difficult to breathe. By the way his wife sniffed and cried, he had no doubt she felt the same. "He killed my baby boy," Kushina shouted and Minato nodded somberly. A team of Anbu appeared, hearing Kushina's earlier scream and took note of the environment. Minato composed himself long enough to stare at the 4 Anbu with cold, steeled eyes. "Get him to Ibiki, now." The 4 nodded as one of them recovered the unconscious man and disappeared. Minato focused his attention back on his wife and saw her shivering. He picked her up and brought her back into the house. He placed her on the bed before she stood up and walked out of the room. He followed her and saw her go to the living room and sat on the couch. Minato sat beside her and she rested her head on his shoulder. He looked down at her and saw silent tears falling down her cheeks. He felt his own tears quietly traveling down his cheek and he quickly wiped them away. They sat quickly, neither saying a word nor looking at each other. They just sat there until they fell asleep. Off in the distance, a man smiled as he held a sleeping, blonde-haired baby in his right hand. He looked down at the baby and he chuckled. He stopped laughing as he felt a second presence nearing. Turning around, he saw the mask of his leader. "Madara," 2 voices said simultaneously as the man bowed as best he could with the child. Madara walked out of the shadows and looked down at Naruto. His lone, Sharingan eye spun slightly as he focused on him. "So your mission was to abduct the Yondaime Hokage's only son, Zetsu?" Madara asked and the half-plant, half-man smiled. "That's correct," Black Zetsu said as his white side chuckled. "It was really easy actually." White Zetsu said, "What of your client?" Madara asked and White Zetsu laughed while his counterpart scoffed. "TCH, the fool was just cannon fodder," the black side said with disgust. "Haha, what a baka," White Zetsu said with a laugh. "Very well," Madara said and was about to walk away but was stopped by Zetsu. "Didn't you come here for the Kyuubi?" White Zetsu said, nodding his head to Naruto. "Baka, shut up," Black Zetsu scolded as Madara turned. "I did but there's been a change in plans," Madara informed them as he eyed Naruto again. "Go, finish your mission. Report back to me when you've completed it." Zetsu nodded before swallowing Naruto with his Venus flytrap like appendage and blended with the ground. Madara began to walk before using his space-time technique to head to Kirigakure. If he expected his plans to begin, he'd have to start soon. Besides, he needed to look for more recruits. Zetsu smirked as he walked through the hall with a silent Naruto in his hands. Currently, he was disguised as the man who hired him. All he needed to do was report in, give his boss the baby, and he'd take a dead man's pay along with his own. Life as a conman was good. He appeared in front of double doors and knocked. He waited for a few seconds but an answer never came. He knocked again but still no one answered. He scoffed as he pushed the doors open and saw a giant room with a desk on the opposite side of the room with a chair with its back to the door. Zetsu walked up to the desk and placed Naruto on top of the table. He grabbed the chair and turned it with enough strength to make it face him. The man sitting in the chair gasped and let out a surprised yelp as he woke from a nap. He blinked when he stared at the man in front of him. He wore a black jumpsuit with a mask concealing the bottom half of his face. His brown hair looked ruffled and unkempt as his tired green eyes stared at him. His brown Iwagakure flak jacket was placed over his black jumpsuit. The man in the chair glared at the man in front of him. "What do you want, Haru?" the man asked angrily. Haru just stared at the man. His facial features included a triangular beard and a mustache with angular corners. He had a big red nose and thick rectangular-shaped eyebrows. The top of his head was completely bald, although he had some white hair at the back and sides of his head, the back of which was tied with a yellow ribbon into a top knot. "My apologize, Tsuchikage-sama, but I have brought your package." Onoki blinked and looked down on his desk to see a small child wrapped in a white, ragged blanket. Onoki noticed that on the side of the blanket was a word. He turned his head slightly and saw the word, Naruto, stitched on it. "This is the Yondaime Hokage's son?" Onoki asked and Haru nodded his head. "Yes sir." Onoki stared at Naruto before he pulled out a suitcase. "Here, this is what you wanted, right?" Onoki asked as he tossed the suitcase at Haru. He caught it and opened it in a single motion. He looked inside and after a moment of silence, he nodded his head. "If you need anything else." Haru saw Onoki shake his head. "Very well. I shall go give the Akatsuki their pay." Onoki seemed to be in his own little world with Naruto, so Haru just left without another word. Haru stepped out of his office and as soon as he did, he sunk into the floor and disappeared. Finally, he started as he held Naruto up in the air with a twisted smile. "I have the means of repaying your father back for all the shit he's put me through," he said as he saw Naruto open his blue eyes. "Old man." Onoki sighed as he heard running coming from outside his office. He waited another second before a small child ran into the room. He had short silver hair and wore a dark orange shirt with blank shorts. He had lively blue eyes and odd whisker marks on the sides of his face. His name was Naruto. "Old man, help!" Naruto yelled as he closed the door and put his back against it. A second later, there was a knock and Onoki raised an eyebrow. "Open this door, Naruto-kun." Onoki sighed at hearing his granddaughter's voice. Why he introduced Naruto to her, he would never remember, though now he wished he hadn't. Ever since they could walk and talk, Kuretsuchi has done nothing but torture Naruto. They were great friends, no doubt about that, but Onoki could see that Naruto was at the age where girls were nothing but a hindrance. He chuckled as he remembered when he was in that phase. "Help," Naruto said with distress in his voice. "What happened this time?" Onoki asked, a little stressed out from the amount of paperwork on his desk. "I don't have time for this. I tripped on my foot, fell and made all of Kuretsuchi-chan's lunch fall to the floor." Naruto answered quickly and Onoki only understood half of it. "Now she's gonna kill me," Naruto said as he kept the door shut. Onoki sighed. "Come over here." Naruto gulped as he prepared himself for a run and in a flash, he appeared by Onoki's side as a young girl fell on the floor. She had short black hair and wore a red shirt with black shorts. Her pink eyes blinked before she looked up. "You're dead, Naruto-kun," she said as she stood and sprinted towards Naruto only to be stopped by her grandfather who moved in front of him. "Stop this racket right now," he yelled and the two children became still and silent. The two stared at the floor with sudden interest. Onoki looked at Kuretsuchi and saw that she was blushing. He rubbed his temples as he sat back down on his chair with a groan. "I'm getting too old for this shit," he mumbled as he looked back up and saw his granddaughter stealing glances at the silver-haired boy. "Kuretsuchi, I don't want to have repeat this in the future. I need Naruto alive," he said, stressing out the word, alive. Kuritsuchi turned her head to the left. I wasn't really gonna kill him, she muttered under her breath, and Onoki raised an eyebrow. Go home, Kuritsuchi, he said, and Kuritsuchi took one last look at Naruto before walking out of the room. Naruto stuck his tongue out and pulled down his bottom eyelid. NYH. Onoki coughed in his balled-up fist, and Naruto turned and stood at attention. As for you, Onoki stood and walked around the desk. I need to have a word with you, he said as he closed the door of his office. He took his time as he turned and walked back to his desk. He stood in front of his desk, facing Naruto. He just continued to look at the floor. You are 7 now and one of Iwa's promising academy students. You are even strong enough to challenge a fresh genin and win. You don't see that a lot these days, Onoki said proudly, and Naruto finally looked into his eyes with a smile. That's why, Onoki continued as he walked back into his chair. I'm going to spend more time training you, he said, and Naruto's eyes widened. F4, for real? Naruto asked, and Onoki nodded. Not only me though, Onoki added, and Naruto's eyebrow raised in confusion. Han and Roshi will be helping me as well. Naruto's eyes lit up like fireworks as a smile graced his lips. Han Ni and Old Man Roshi? Really? Naruto asked in hyperactive eagerness. It then vanished when a question popped into his head. Why? He asked, and Onoki's mood became solemn. We need you to learn how to use the Kyuubi, he answered, and Naruto looked at his stomach. He was told of the Kyuubi sealed inside him 2 years ago. It took him a while to completely accept it. They heard stories about Konoha being attacked by the Kyuubi and even managing to kill it. At first, that confused Naruto, but when Onoki explained that it was actually peace offering from Konoha, Naruto just shrugged it off. He frowned at the thought of Konoha. Those peace-loving fools should have been destroyed during the last Shinobi War. However, they ended up winning because of the Yondaime Hokage. That man irritated Naruto. He was a cold-hearted killer who was the bane of Naruto's existence ever since Onoki told him that he was the reason why his parents died. Thinking about your parents? Onoki asked. At first, he didn't even hesitate to lie to Naruto. He never felt bad. In fact, he felt rejuvenated knowing that he was turning the Yondaime Hokage's son against him. But recently, it's been getting harder and harder to do it. At least, consciously. I didn't even get to see them, he said sadly. It's all his fault, he stated angrily as he wiped away his tears. Easy, boy, Onoki said, and Naruto took some deep breaths before nodding and looking at Onoki. Now, the training will be hard and will push you to your limit. Emotionally, physically, and mentally, but, in the end, the results will be remarkable. Onoki leaned forward and motioned Naruto to come closer. By the end of the next 6 years, you'll be strong enough to participate in the Chunin exams. Naruto's eyes shined as a huge smile graced his lips. You think so? Onoki nodded and sat back down on his chair. However, I'm gonna need you to be serious while we train, Onoki said seriously, and Naruto gulped. No jokes, no laughs. Naruto nodded after some hesitation, and Onoki smiled. Good, now go look for Roshi, he'll start your training with the Kyuubi. Naruto nodded and ran out of the room. Onoki watched him leave with a sad smile before returning to his paperwork. I see great things in your future, Naruto. A figure hid behind a bush. He saw 3 men stationed in front of the double doors of the warehouse he was watching. They were talking amongst themselves. To any normal person, these men would look distracted. However, he knew that was far from the truth. He took a deep breath before flashing a brief smile. He then covered the bottom half of his face with a mask. The figure looked up at the moon for a moment before jumping out from behind the bush and speeding towards the guards. The figure was so fast that the guards were barely able to react before he was on top of them. The center guard managed to throw a kunai, striking the person trying to kill them between the eyes. The figure's face had a shocked expression just before it broke down into pebbles. The guards looked on in shock as they were not expecting it. The figure that was clad all in black appeared directly in front of the center guard, smashing his elbow into the guard's face. The figure then turned and drove his right foot into the second guard's gut. The third guard tried to kick him in the face, but the figure grabbed his leg, spun and tossed him to the second guard. Both hit the wall behind them, knocking the second guard out and making the third fall to the floor. The figure jumped on top of the third guard and smashed his right fist into the man's face, successfully knocking him out. He flinched when he heard a sickening sound come from the hit, but he shook it off and proceeded with his plan. With all three guards disposed of, the figure walked into the building and saw tons of guards around the place. There were countless boxes, platforms and levels everywhere. There were 2 stairs on each side of the building, leading to the second floor. Did you hear that? The figure moved behind a box and heard footsteps heading his way. The man was taller than the figure, but the figure smirked as he flipped into the air and landed in front of the man. The man blinked, but before he could say anything, the figure jumped and kneed the man in the gut. The man doubled over and the figure grabbed onto the man with a bear hug and bent back. Using his strength, the figure threw the man back and the man went through the wall. The sound resonated through the warehouse and the figure knew his cover was blown when he heard the sound of footsteps behind him. "Don't move," the figure cursed as he felt a kunai tip rest on his back. He put his arms up and was led through the warehouse. He saw every guard looking at him with anger. He smirked and slid to the side as he grabbed the man with the kunai and slammed his face into the box in front of him. The man fell with a thud and the figure looked around. "Get him!" a man yelled. The figure fell to the floor and kicked his legs out just as a man stood over him. The man fell and the figure grabbed the man's kunai before stabbing the fallen man behind the neck and ducking into a group of boxes as the other guards started throwing their kunai and shuriken. The figure threw his kunai at a man on top of a pile of boxes and hit him in the middle of his chest. The figure took out more kunai and hit 3 other guards, 2 on the ground and 1 sitting on the second floor. The one on the second floor fell off and landed on incoming guards. Forcing a kunai free from the box next to him, he aimed it at the light over him and threw. That portion of the warehouse became shrouded by darkness and the figure smirked as he heard footsteps suddenly stop in the middle of the darkness. The only thing the 4 guards heard before they died was the sound of an object flying through the air. The other guards began to panic when they heard 4 bodies hit the ground unceremoniously. On the lower levels, a handful of guards appeared and the figure jumped from the darkness and kicked the guard standing in front of the group. The guard fell back and knocked the other 4 guards down. The figure grabbed one guard by the neck and used his strength to drag the man through the floor and slam him into a pillar holding the level above it. Everyone heard it crack, but the pillar didn't fall. The figure ducked as one guard tried to attack him from behind and instead kicked the guard plastered to the cracked pillar. The figure grabbed the surprised guard and sent him through the thin and cracked pillar, making it fall on him and tilting it. The figure looked at it for a second before ducking a kick from a new guard and jumping back. He climbed up the tilted platform before jumping down and kicking a guard in the face with a roundhouse kick. Another appeared and the figure rolled to his back after grabbing the new guard's collar. He placed his feet on the guard's stomach and monkey flipped him into a wall. He jumped to his feet and smiled. He growled when a kunai dug into his shoulder, and, before another could be thrown, the figure yanked out the kunai from his bleeding shoulder and tossed it back at the guard who threw it. The wound healed in moments. He cursed when an alarm went off and ran to the door nearest him. He climbed up the wall and held on to the alarm that flashed a red light. A second later, the door burst open and 4 guards appeared, looking around the room, confused. The figure dropped down and kicked one guard behind his head and landed in between the 3 remaining guards. He then punched one guard, sending him flying through the door. Turning, the figure dropped just as a punch almost hit his head and kicked the guard's legs from under him. The guard fell and the figure cartwheeled over the guard, grabbing onto his shirt and tossing him into a box, shattering the box and knocking him out. The last guard stood in fear, too afraid to turn around. The figure waited until the guard finally turned and threw a punch. The figure caught it, pivoted and shoved his elbow in the man's chin. He was airborne for only a second, but that's all the figure needed to turn and kick him in the gut, sending him flying into a pile of unconscious men. The figure climbed up the wall and made it to the platform above him but froze when 15 guards appeared out of nowhere. The figure then ran in the opposite direction before jumping and grabbing onto a railing above him. He turned his body and kicked the pursuing guards in the face. They fell off the platform and the figure swung himself to the adjacent platform just as more guards appeared. He slid and knocked the guards off their feet and into the ground 10 feet below them. The figure stood, facing the other guards and gave a harsh kick to one in the face with sickening sound, turned and kicked another in the gut with the same foot. He spun and grabbed a guard's face and shoved his left knee into it. The figure groaned as he got punched in the back of the head. He used the momentum from the punch to roll, appear under a guard, place his hands firmly on the ground and push himself up to kick the guard in the face. Jumping to his feet, the figure grabbed the airborne guard's feet and threw him at the guard who punched him. The other guards caught up to the figure but were stopped when the figure ran in between them. He kneed a guy in the gut, turned, sent a sharp palm to the face, kicked a third in the stomach and without looking back, kicked the guy he kneed in the face. Predicting what was to come, the figure back-flipped just as another guard appeared and kicked him in the chin. Still on his hands, the figure kicked the next guard in the face repeatedly before the guard fell, unconscious. 3 more guards fell from the second floor and the figure spun, extending out his legs and efficiently kicking each one in the face. He then jumped and landed on another guard and saw more heading for him. He rolled back, avoiding a man's punch, then rolled onto his feet and leapt up, shoving his knee into the man's stomach and punching him in the face as the man doubled over. Another crack was heard. The figure ran away from a guard, ran up a wall, back-flipped and drove his knees into the man's shoulders. He jumped off the guard and grabbed onto a higher platform's edge and flipped onto it, kicking a guard in the face and making him fall off. He landed on his butt and looked around, seeing other guards climbing the pillar holding the platform. He slid across the platform and kicked a man in the face just as he reached the top. The figure rolled back onto his hands and kicked his legs back, connecting with a guard just as he was about to shove a kunai into the figure. It suddenly became quiet. Suddenly, about 30 guards appeared and surrounded the figure. He looked around and was suddenly dog-piled by the guards. They punched and kicked the figure, thinking that they had finally won. Unfortunately, this only angered the figure. The figure stood on an adjacent platform and eyed the group who were still unaware that he had replaced himself with one of the guards. He eyed the group intently before snapping his fingers with a brief smile. He made hand signs before putting both hands to the side of his mouth as if he was shouting. A small fireball shot out from his mouth and headed for the group of guards. The guards turned their heads and their eyes widened. They separated and smirked as the fireball passed by them harmlessly. The figure only smirked as the fireball hit the platform and erupted into a firestorm, catching all the guards in its wake. The figure hid behind a pillar until it died down and stepped out. He surveyed the area and saw that no more guards were coming, so he climbed the nearest stairs and jumped onto the second floor. He looked around and saw a guard standing on top of the highest pile of boxes while the others were scattered around the room. Standing 10 feet in front of the figure, a giant of a man smirked as he eyed the figure. "We've been waiting for you," the man said, and the figure narrowed his eyes. The giant stood 6 feet tall and wore a green shirt and black pants. His hair was brown and his onyx eyes showed confidence. "I get first dibs." The other guards nodded as the giant ran at the figure. The figure jumped and tried to punch the giant, but the giant grabbed his fist and tossed him into the nearest box, sending him through it. The figure recovered quickly and jumped on the giant's back. The giant fell on his back and the figure yelled out in pain at the man's weight on him. He squirmed out from under the man and ran to a wall. He ran up it, and, just as the giant man was over him, he turned, pushed himself off the wall and kicked him in the face. It didn't affect the man much as he kicked the figure in the stomach as soon as the figure landed. The figure hit the wall, but before he could slide down, the giant grabbed his neck and tossed him to the group of guards. He went through a box but burst out of it as he zoomed back to the giant and kneed him in the face. The giant took a step back, giving the figure time to jump down the stairs. However, he was caught by the giant and tossed in the air. The giant jumped and punched him in the gut. The figure crashed into the wall and created cracks around himself. He started to slide down and the giant drove his shoulder into his chest. "Gah!" he yelled as he was then grabbed and sent flying by a cruel elbow to the chest. The figure slid to a stop just as he reached a smiling guard with red hair. "Need help?" the man asked, but before the figure could answer, a bow staff with a sharp end appeared in the figure's hands. The figure jumped to his feet, twirled the bow staff around his body and ran at the giant. The giant just smiled but wasn't expecting the figure to disappear. He then received a harsh hit to the back of his head and fell to his knees. The figure landed in front of him, hit him a few more times in the face and then shoved the entire bow staff through the man's head and then removed it. The other guards watched in shock before throwing kunai at the figure. A cloak of red chakra appeared, surrounding the figure, and the figure disappeared in a blink of an eye. He appeared in the middle of 5 guards and used the sharp end of the bow staff to cut the throats of each guard before they could stop him. He avoided a kunai thrown at him by the guard on the highest box pile and appeared over 3 more guards. He kicked one in the face while he struck the second guard with the pointy end of the bow staff. It went through his chest while the third guard kicked the figure in the back. However, the chakra cloak burned the man's foot and effectively nullified the kick. The figure turned and punched the last guard with all his might. Dodging another kunai, the figure harshly removed the bow staff from the dead guard and threw it at the last guard. It went through his neck and he fell dead. "Look out behind you," the red-haired guard said, and the figure turned to see a woman running up to him. Aside from the giant of a man, all the guards and bandits wore black pants with either a white shirt or no shirt, but the woman running towards him. The figure could see this one was different. She seemed more skilled than the others. The figure met the woman in the middle and threw a punch, but the woman turned her head to the side and kicked the figure's feet from under him. He rolled, jumped to his feet and sent both his legs towards the woman while keeping himself up with his arms. The guard jumped over his feet, and when she landed, the figure was already on his feet. "Who are you?" the guard asked, but the figure never spoke. "My name is Nako," Nako said, but the figure yet again denied him a response. Instead, the figure just ran at her and threw a second punch, but Nako deflected it with ease and kicked him in the stomach, sending her sliding back as her long blue hair flowed freely behind her. Her gold eyes stared at the figure's eyes, and the figure's eyes widened as seeing her slit pupil. The figure stopped and fell to a fighting stance as Nako smiled cutely at him. "Kitsune." Nako blinked at the figure's sudden spoken word. "You can call me Kitsune," Kitsune said, and Nako smiled like a Cheshire cat. Kitsune noticed that she was around his age, but she was more developed than girls her age. He was glad he wore a mask that covered the bottom half of his face, otherwise, he wouldn't want her questioning the sudden pink tint in his cheeks or exclaiming about him being a perv. Over the mature body was a dark blue jacket with a black shirt under it. Her black pants seemed to be 2 sizes too large, but she kept it up with a dark blue obi. She was barefooted with long, claw-like nails on her hands and feet. Kitsune had to admit, though, the girl was pretty cute. The red-haired guard disappeared sometime after she attacked him, and Kitsune had to growl. "What's wrong, cutie? Looking for someone?" she asked with a smile, and again, Naruto found himself fond of the mask over his face. "I'm your opponent now," she said as he dropped to her hands, looking like an animal on all fours. "Who the hell is she? This is not part of the plan," a silhouette thought as his chakra flowed around the warehouse. Nako tensed her muscles as she watched Kitsune dash towards her at incredible speeds. In a quick progression, Kitsune sent a punch to Nako and then turned and extended his leg out to kick her head. She blocked the first strike before ducking and jumping over a third kick to her legs. Kitsune had his back turned to her and kicked his leg back to hit her stomach. She caught it with ease and lifted her leg up, hoping to knock his balance off. He only used her hand as leverage to flip to his feet and smoothly turned to punch her. However, Nako was quicker as she sent a backhand to Kitsune's face, sending him tumbling into a couple of boxes. He looked up and rolled to the side just as Nako appeared over him and about to send a strong foot to the chest. He jumped to his feet and ran at Nako, only for them to grapple each other and fight for dominance. Being the stronger of the two, Kitsune was able to lift Nako off her feet. Nako was well aware of what he was about to do, so she spun her body and slapped his arms away. She landed on her hands and feet and looked up in time to dodge a kick from Kitsune. She got up to her feet and swiftly dodged a punch from Kitsune. Kitsune followed it up with a left fist to the face, but Nako was able to dodge that one as well. He sent a kick to her body, but she backflipped away from him. He ran up to her but was stopped by a kick to the sternum. She thrust a palm to his face, but he parried it off with his left forearm and sent his own palm to her face. She ducked and back-flipped away, but not before having kicked him in the chin. Kitsune was sent in the air as he tried to recover from the vicious kick. He managed to flip his body and land on his feet. His azure eyes scanned Nako as she ran at him, and at the last minute, he dodged her leg sweep with a jump and managed to land a foot to her chest. The kick knocked all of the oxygen from her lungs while sending her through 2 boxes. With quick hand signs, Kitsune placed a hand on his hands to the side of his mouth as if he was shouting, "Fire style. Searing pain." Kitsune shouted as a fireball escaped his mouth and headed for the down Neko. Suddenly, a wall of earth appeared and protected the down girl. Kitsune sneered as he ran and leapt over the wall with the grace of a fox. He landed behind the wall but was not expecting another wall to appear in front of him. Tamor appeared from the side, boxing him in. At the sound of a cat's meow, he looked up and saw Neko smiling at him. Without further warning, she spat out a stream of fire and completely enveloped Kitsune. She landed on top of the earth wall and stared at the fire pit with passive eyes before they lit up at the sight movement and heard a loud growl from the fire. A smile graced her lips as the fire was suddenly rising from the pit and reached the sky. A second growl was heard and Neko was sent flying through the warehouse. Kitsune climbed the earth wall and glared at Neko as she hit the wall. She slid down the wall and sat unmoving. He cursed under her breath as his singed mask fell off his face. He yelled out in anger as he ripped out the rest of his mask and his shirt. They were holding him back anyway. He walked up to her and picked her up by the collar of her jacket. Her golden eyes popped open and she smiled as she grabbed onto Kitsune's arms and drove both feet into his chest, making him fall on his back. She landed on her feet and fell into a fighting stance as Naruto rolled back and jumped to his feet. "You're a lot of fun." She eyed him with lustful eyes and smile. "And well built. Now show me what the container of the Kyuubi can do," she said, and Kitsune's eye narrowed. She saw the expression in his eyes and scoffed. "Don't give me that bull. I know exactly who you are, Naruto." Naruto's eyes widened. "Who are you?" Naruto asked, and Neko giggled. "I told you, my name is Neko." Her features suddenly became more feral. Her animalistic eyes became more defined as her canine teeth and nails grew. Her ears suddenly disappeared under her long blue hair and a pair of blue cat ears popped out of the top of her head. Naruto's eyes were close to popping out of his head as a tail suddenly formed from behind Neko. Blue chakra surrounded the girl like Naruto's chakra cloak. It was as potent as his, but Naruto felt a chill run down his spine. "Show me," she purred as she was suddenly behind Naruto. Naruto blinked as he felt Neko's breath on his neck. "I didn't even notice her move," Naruto thought as he activated his fox eyes. Everything became clearer and he turned to elbow Neko in the face but was surprised when he saw that he was too slow to touch her. She seemed to be in a different league and Naruto doubted he could touch her while in that form. She punched him in the face and sent him crashing through the warehouse and into a tree. He groaned as he opened his eyes and saw Neko walking over to him, her hips swaying seductively. She had a mischievous smile on her face as Naruto picked himself up with the help of the tree. The night air felt cold as it passed over his sweat. "Show me now," she said as she ran and thrust a palm forward. Naruto ducked, causing Neko's palm to go through the tree. Naruto jumped away from her. She let him dodge that one and he knew it. "You know I let you get away with that one," she stated with a knowing smile, and Naruto cursed. "Show me what your beast can do." Sprinting, Naruto came face to face with Neko, but before he could punch her, she sent a smart knee to his gut. He doubled over and took a step back. He looked up and jumped over Neko as she tried to drive her shoulder into his chest. However, he wasn't expecting Neko to jump as well and punch his chin with an uppercut. He fell to the ground with a harsh thud and slowly got up. He made hand signs, "Fire style. Running fire." He shouted as he pat out a stream of fire and surrounded Neko. Making more hand signs, he sucked in a deep breath. "Wind style. Divine wind." Small tornadoes appeared from Naruto's mouth and headed for Neko. The tornadoes sucked up the fire and became tornadoes of flames as they engulfed Neko. She jumped out of the flames without a scratch on her and surprised Naruto with a knee to the face. Naruto stood with a growl as his canine teeth grew and his whisker marks became more defined. His red irises darkened but his pupil remained circular. Red chakra surrounded him, giving him ears on the top of his head and a tail. "That's better," Neko said. She blinked when he disappeared before feeling a hard fist connecting with her left cheek. She then felt an elbow to the back of her head, a knee to her stomach and a kick to her back. She skid to a stop and giggled. She hadn't had so much fun in years. Naruto disappeared and slammed the bottom of his foot on Neko's back, sending her crashing into the ground. She tried to stand but Naruto forced her down with his foot. He took a step back but she still refused to go down. Clasping his hands together, he brought it down and sent her further into the ground. He jumped back, not surprised that she stood up from the hit. He stared at her with impassive eyes and she couldn't help but smile charmingly. "You're gonna make me blush if you keep staring at me like that," she said coyly as she wiped the blood from the corner of her mouth with her tongue. Naruto fought down a blush as Neiko slowly walked towards him while her more animalistic characteristics began to vanish as if it was a mirage. As she walked, Neiko was very captivating. Her golden eyes shined as they stared intently at him. Her hair seemed like ice shining brightly from under the moon's light. Her jacket was long gone and her black short was ragged with some holes on it. In fact, the bottom half of her shirt was burned and ripped off during the battle. Along with the shirt, her pants were completely destroyed and some blood traveled down his nose. He wiped it off with his left arm. Her creamy, long legs looked really soft. "Like the show?" she asked with a perverted smile and Naruto growled. She then became serious. "There are more like me. Others just like us," she said and Naruto eyed her cautiously as she stopped just a foot away from him. "What do you mean, us?" Naruto asked. "Don't trust the hunters. Any of them," she said before cutely smiling and brushed her hand softly across his left cheek. "You're going to need my help in the future, don't forget me," was the last thing she said before she ran into the forest. Naruto stood in the middle of the silent night before he heard clapping. "Good job, Naruto. 7 years of training and the results aren't disappointing," a red-haired man said and Naruto sighed as his cloak disappeared. There was no doubt the red-haired man heard what. He smiled as he felt his sweat drip from his head. He brushed his silver hair with his right hand and chuckled. "Thanks Roshi-sensei. Your taijutsu is at least mid-chunin," Roshi stated and Naruto frowned. "Mid-chunin?" he whined. "You did get hit by a bunch of henchmen," Roshi observed and Naruto pouted. "You have incredible stamina and chakra, and you managed to pull off that jutsu without a sweat." Naruto smiled and Roshi walked up to him, placing a fatherly hand on his shoulder. "If it were up to me, I'd promote you to Chunin now," he said, making Naruto smile brightly. "However, you know we can't do that." "Well, we shouldn't," he said and his smile left him. Naruto put his hand on his stomach and Roshi nodded. "When you take the graduation test tomorrow, don't go overboard. That way, no one will say anything." Naruto nodded and Roshi patted his back. "Make us proud, kid." "Whoa, wait." Roshi blinked. He started walking, heading for home but Naruto stopped him. "What about the mission?" Naruto asked and Roshi flashed the briefest of smiles. This was the mission. Take out the bandits and kill the big, bad boss. Naruto raised an eyebrow. "While you handled the small fries, I sneaked into the big man's room and finished the job." Naruto growled. "Bastard." Roshi smirked as he began to walk away. "When was the last time you dyed your hair?" Naruto blinked as Roshi's voice echoed from the forest. "Your blonde hair is starting to show. You might want to take care of that, brat." Naruto looked around and saw a lake 20 feet from him. He ran over and from the light coming from the moon above him, Naruto saw that he had blonde roots. What the? Naruto didn't know why he had blonde roots, he always thought he had silver hair. He stood and walked to the Tsuchikage's tower with a purpose. He didn't know why he had blonde roots. But he knew someone who would. Watching him leave, a silhouette cursed under his breath as he felt someone appear behind him. "Well, I'm guessing that girl wasn't part of the genjutsu," Roshi guessed. "No, she wasn't," Onoki answered as he stepped into the moonlight. "Still, he did pretty well," he added and Roshi nodded. "No doubt. Still, what do you think she meant?" he asked and Onoki sighed. "Let's worry about that later. For now." Onoki punched Roshi's left arm but inadvertently caused his back to pop. "Ow, my back," he whined and Roshi rubbed his left arm. "Old fool, what was that for?" After composing himself, Onoki glared at Roshi. "He isn't supposed to know about his blonde hair, that's why." Roshi said nothing as he headed for home. Onoki disappeared as his body seemed composed of dust being blown away by the wind. Naruto walked down the Tsuchikage's tower hallway. His mind was unwavering and his purpose steeled. He burst through the double doors and watched as Onoki jumped from his desk and looked around, clearly confused. "Old man, we need to talk," Naruto said seriously as he sat down on the chair in front of Onoki's chair. "Ah, Naruto, you've returned. How did the training go?" he asked, oblivious that Naruto was atypically serious. "Great, took out about 60 men." Onoki smiled. "Don't get too excited. Most of them probably dropped out when they were genin. Onoki shook his head with a smile. He wasn't sure why he hadn't mentioned the Neko girl, but he couldn't ask him about it or else he'd sound suspicious. Still, 60? That's quite the feat. Naruto scoffed with a smirk of his own before his solemn demeanor returned. Old man, Naruto started as he stood and bent forward. The hell's the deal with this? Onoki eyed his head and they immediately went to the blonde portion of his hair and his eyes widened. Interesting, Onoki stated before leaning back on his chair. Naruto, when was the last time you shampooed? Naruto straightened his back and raised an eyebrow. What? When was the last time you shampooed? Onoki asked again, and when he saw Naruto open his mouth with the same confused expression, he sighed. Just answer the damn question, boy. A month, maybe 2. Onoki held his head as he sighed. Why should that matter though? Naruto asked. There is a reason why you have blonde roots, because your natural hair color is yellow. Onoki said, and Naruto's eyes narrowed. That shampoo I gave you was to help keep your hair silver. What? He asked in a low voice. You showed me a picture of my parents, none of them were blonde. He said, it's probably somewhere in your family tree. Onoki said, which was not really a lie. Either way, I decided to dye your hair silver. He said, and Naruto sat down in the chair behind him. Why? Have you seen anyone in Iwa with blonde hair? Naruto shook his head. Do you know who does have blonde hair? Onoki let Naruto process the information and try to answer the question. Finally, Naruto got it and looked away while mumbling something under his breath and crossing his arms over his chest. What? Onoki asked as he placed his hands behind his ear. Speak up. The Yondaime. Exactly, and I didn't think you'd want to look like him. Naruto said nothing, but he lost his angry look. Instead, he had a hurt look. I don't like that. I've been lied to for most of my life. Naruto turned his azure eyes to Onoki and Onoki flinched. Even if it's something small like this. Understandable, Onoki said, and Naruto stood. He was about to walk out of the room but stopped before walking out of the threshold. Is there anything else I should know? He asked, and Onoki looked straight into his eyes. No, he answered, and Naruto nodded before walking out of the room. With his head hung low, Naruto closed the door and just stood there for a second. I guess I know who I can trust, he commented to himself before walking out of the tower. Naruto walked down the street with his hands in his pockets. 2 days have passed since the mission given to him and Roshi by Onoki, and the same day he met an interesting girl. Now, today, he passed his graduation test. Just as he thought, some of the teachers were hoping for his failure. So he took the advice of Roshi and did just enough to pass but not seem like he's hanging by a thread. With his forehead protector tied to his forehead, Naruto continued to walk down the street with pride. However, there was no smile on his face and no skip to his step. There was something weighing his happiness down. Under different circumstances, Naruto would be jumping around the entire village, proclaiming his advancement to Genin to any and everybody in sight. Hell, he'd probably invite some friends to ramen. He would be that happy. Still, Naruto wasn't in the mood to celebrate. He knew why, but he had yet to swallow it, the idea. He couldn't accept the idea. The words alone would break his spirit down. Yet, he knew. Deep down, somewhere in his mind, he knew cold hard truth. He couldn't trust the old man. He couldn't trust Kuritsuchi because of her connection to the old man. He couldn't trust Iwagakure, at least, not completely. He knew he could trust Roshi and Han. Han more than Roshi. They knew his pain, the loneliness every Jinchuriki felt deep in their heart. They could never connect to people the way normal people can. However, it didn't matter how many people Naruto convinced to be his friends, he was glad to at least have Roshi and Han. He cared about the quality, not the quantity. He watched as the sun began to set, painting half of the sky with reddish pink and orange while the other side contained a sea of dark indigo. The stars have yet to reveal themselves, but the moon was out and about. Hey, Naruto-kun. Naruto stopped and turned to see Kuritsuchi running up to him. She decided to keep her black hair short, which didn't look bad on her. She wore what Naruto guessed was a long, red kimono with the sleeve on her right arm missing as well as the bottom left side of the kimono, fishnet tights and shorts over them. Her pink cheeks were almost as pink as her eyes. Naruto had known of her crush for a while now. In fact, looking back on it now, he had to guess that it started around the same time he began his intense training. He had seen very little of her since he started the training, but she was still his friend, so when he got the time, he'd hang out with her. Still, he wished she would stop running after him and stop to smell the roses, or at least notice the quiet boy who would stare at her in class. "Hey Kuritsuchi," Naruto greeted with a forced smile. Whether or not she noticed how fake it was, she didn't show it and continued to smile happily. "Aren't you happy? We're genin now," she asked, and Naruto nodded with a chuckle. "At least we won't have to listen to Sosuke-sensei talk about boring stuff." Kuritsuchi laughed. "True. So, Her blush darkened and Naruto smiled as he put his arm around her and started walking. She was surprised by his sudden action and walked beside him. "Spit it out," Naruto said. "Whose team do you think you'll be in?" she asked, and Naruto hummed, looking thoughtful as if he was truly giving it some thought. He found that piece of information trivial at the moment, but thinking about it, oh hell, he still didn't care. "Hopefully with someone I'm close with." Naruto turned to look at Kuritsuchi. "What about you?" "With you." Naruto knew she was going to say that. "And not because I like you or anything, I just don't want to paired with some weaklings," she answered with a blush. "Smooth," Naruto thought sarcastically. "Smooth," Kuritsuchi thought. She had to smile at her skill and tact. "I guess we'll see tomorrow. Though, knowing that old fool, he'll probably put us on the same team and then cry out from his back pain." Kuritsuchi laughed, and Naruto couldn't help but laugh with her. After walking in silence for a couple of blocks, and a couple of awkward glances, Kuritsuchi bumped her shoulder against Naruto's. "What's wrong?" she asked, and Naruto forced another smile. "What do you mean?" He saw that he wasn't fooling her and put his smile away. What's the word? Awesome?" she joked, and Naruto shook his head. "I think troublesome is better." "You're troublesome." "Hey, wonder if anyone else says that." Off in a different village, a boy sneezed and wiped his nose with the sleeve of his shirt. "That's disgusting," a woman yelled, and the young boy sighed. "Shikamaru, troublesome," the boy muttered. Kuritsuchi stared at Naruto, a little hurt. "Anyway, it's nothing you should worry about," Naruto said and looked at her. "Honestly, I'm fine, I just got a lot of things going on in my head," Naruto assured her. She opened her mouth, but no word escaped as she saw someone walking towards them. "I guess I'll see you later then," she said before entering a random shop, just so it looked like she had to go in there. Unknown to her at that time, she walked into a lingerie store. Naruto laughed, and it became louder when he heard her yell, "Naruto," a rough voice said, and Naruto smiled. "Han ni, what's up?" Naruto asked as he stood in front of the mountainous man. Han was a very paranoid man, up to the point that he reminded Naruto of a tank with feet. He was heavily armored, wearing what he called steam armor, with a furnace on the back that would emit steam when he used it. He had brown eyes, and his armor extended all the way to the bottom half of his face, covering it up. Aside from his red armor, he also wore a red conical straw hat that seemed to be composed of the same material of his armor. Over his armor, Han had a black gi, with the sleeves seemingly torn off, and black gloves. "I heard you graduated today. Congratulations," he said, and Naruto crossed his arms over his chest and smirked. "I know you can do better than that, Han ni." Han's brown eyes softened as he knelt in front Naruto and placed a hand on Naruto's shoulder. "I'm proud of you, Naruto." Naruto smiled. "Thanks." Ever since his training finished, Naruto felt like he was a man. When he graduated and became an official shinobi for Iwa, this feeling got stronger. He felt like a man who could do no wrong, who did everything the right way the first time. He didn't care if he had to live on his own, he knew he could do it and be successful in doing so. Still, whenever he was around Han, that feeling flew out the window and was replaced with the feeling of a young boy blindly following his older brother around. He didn't hate it, but it did make him wonder if it made him a bit dependent of Han. He shook his head, he had a lot to think of as it was. He didn't need any more thoughts running through his mind. "Naruto?" Naruto blinked as he saw Han standing over him with a questioning gaze. "Man, I zoned out for a good while." "Huh? I asked if you'd like me to treat you to ramen?" Han repeated, and after thinking it over, Naruto shook his head. "Thanks, but maybe later. I need to go to my thinking spot," Naruto said, and after waving goodbye to Han, he continued to walk around the village. He stopped at the edge of the village where the village ended and the mountains began. He used his chakra to stick to the wall, and he began his trek up the mountain. When he finally reached the top, he sat down at the tip of the mountain. He remembered when he had problems climbing the damnable mountain with his chakra. From top to bottom, he hated doing it, but in the end, it proved to be useful and he was sort of glad he spent half a year doing it. He sighed contentedly as he watched the sun shine its final rays before going over the horizon and completely welcoming night into the village. He always loved climbing the mountain and just watching the sunset. It was his favorite place to just sit and do nothing or just to think. A sudden flashback hit Naruto and he remembered seeing the look Onoki's eyes had when Naruto asked him if there was anything else he should know. Naruto wasn't the smartest person in Iwa, but he knew how to read body language and tell when he's being lied to. It was all in the eyes. "What aren't you telling me, old man?" Naruto asked no one. The wind whistled as the night air coolly blew over the entire village. Unknown to Naruto, a certain blonde-haired man was also sitting on top of a mountain, staring over his village as it slept. Minato-kun. Minato slowly turned his head and saw his wife hesitantly walking towards him. She wrapped him in a hug and held him tightly. 13 years later and it still affects them. "I know," he said as he felt his wife shake under his hold. "Next month will be 14 years. What do you think he's doing?" Kushina asked and Minato couldn't stop the smile from reaching his lips. "Probably eating ramen," Minato said and heard Kushina giggle. He didn't believe his son was dead. If he was, the Kyuubi would have escaped and alongside his child's death. He'd have to worry about the Kyuubi running around. His kid was out there, somewhere in the world, and one day, he'd find him and bring him home. After standing there a while longer, Minato and Kushina headed home. Minato stared intently at the papers in his hands. The mission was simple. There's been some suspicious activity near the Land of Fire's borders. It was nothing special. Go there, check out what's going on and report back. He put down the mission scroll and grabbed the file that contained available teams. There weren't that many and he needed a team specifically designed for tracking. 2 teams fit that description perfectly. Making a decision, Minato closed the file and rolled up the mission scroll before pocketing it and leaving his office. Upon hearing the Hokage's door open, his secretary looked back and a blush automatically appeared on her tan cheeks. She shyly brushed aside a stray black hair and her brown eyes shifted to the scroll in Minato's hand. "Why, Yondaime-sama, are you going to assign someone that mission?" His secretary asked and Minato put on a smile and nodded his head. "Here, let me call someone to deliver it in." No, she was about to pick up her phone but was stopped by Minato's sudden proclamation. "It's fine, I need a break from the office," he said and waved to her as he left. He sighed and shook his head when he had his back turned to her. 14 years of marriage and the fangirls were still everywhere. Stepping into the sunlight, Minato couldn't help but smile as he noticed how peaceful his village was. Even with the death of his son, he had somehow managed to successfully lead his village into prosperity and peace within the 5 great nations. Sure, they weren't really allied with the other 4 nations, but they weren't at war either. He smiled and waved at the villagers he passed by, occasionally making small talk with the shinobi he ran into. He knew where he was going. The team he was looking for would always train at the same training ground. After walking for about 10 minutes, he walked into the borders of Training Ground 12. He was about to call for the team's sensei when he saw the 3 genin working together in a spar against her. Their sensei had black, shoulder-length untamed hair, and very unique eyes that were red in color, with an additional ring in them. She wore makeup consisting of red lipstick and purple eyeshadow. Her regular outfit consisted of a red mesh armor blouse with only the right sleeve visible. Over this was very broad material which resembled bandages with a pattern on it similar to those of rose thorns. Her hands and upper thighs were also wrapped in bandages and had the Konoha forehead protector and regular shinobi sandals. Their sensei, one Kurenai Yuhi, swiftly dodged a drill while also avoiding being captured by the Aburame clan's Kakaichu bugs. The drill that she so easily avoided stopped in midair and Minato could see a boy growling. His attire consisted of dark grayish pants reaching to his calves and a gray, hooded fur-lined coat, with the hood usually placed on his head, over an apparent plate of armor and fishnet undershirt with a blue forehead protector and blue sandals. Another boy appeared from a column of bugs. He had bushy dark brown hair, pale skin, and was the taller of the 2 boys. He was sporting the same style as the rest of his clan, consisting of dark sunglasses and a sea green jacket with a high, upturned collar. A wave of insects appeared, and with a simple motion from the taller boy, the insects rushed towards Kurenai. Minato noticed that both boys were leading their sensei to the edge of the training grounds, where he saw, from his angle, a young girl hiding behind a tree. The girl had dark blue hair and fair skin, traits Minato knew she inherited from her mother, and lavender eyes. Her hair was a Heim-cut style, with chin-length strands framing her face. She wore a cream-colored hooded jacket with a fire symbol on the upper right and left sleeves and fur around the cuffs and hem, with navy blue pants. He smiled softly at seeing Hinata again. He'd been there for Hiyashi when she was born. He was freaking out, and Minato had to laugh at his usually stoic friend's expression. She was such a beautiful baby, just like. Minato looked away, down to his feet, as a mental image of a newborn Naruto in his beautiful wife's arms entered his mind. He shook his head and looked back up just in time to see Hinata jump out of her hiding spot and try to hit her sensei with a chakra-powered palm. Minato couldn't hold back a chuckle as he watched Kurenai back flip over Hinata, whose eyes widened at her sensei's limberness and agility. Kurenai landed with the grace of a veteran ballet dancer and extended her left leg as she knelt down and spun in place, making Hinata fall to her left side. Minato was amazed but not surprised when Hinata immediately rolled away from her sensei, used the momentum to raise herself up with her hands and flip away. She landed beside her two teammates, her breathing a bit labored. Minato was surprised when Hinata turned her head in his direction, but his surprise was wiped away when he noticed that Hinata still had her Byakugan active. "Someone's here," Kiba stated as he took another whiff of the air, along with his furry companion, who barked in agreement. Hinata bowed her head as Minato walked toward Team 8 whilst clapping his hands. "That was a very inspiring display. You have an extraordinary team here, Kurenai," Minato complimented, causing Kurenai to smile pridefully. Her team also smiled, but Hinata blushed as well, enjoying Minato's kind words. "It makes me more assured about Konoha's future and the continuation of the Will of Fire. It also makes me confident I won't have to worry about you four while you're out on your mission." Team 8, Kurenai included, blinked in surprise and confusion. "Mission?" Kiba asked, and Minato nodded. He tossed Kurenai the mission scroll. Kurenai caught it and unrolled it. After reading it, she looked at her leader with questioning red eyes. "Question?" he asked with humor in his voice, his smile widening and his eyes crinkling at seeing her reaction. "Are you sure you want us to do this mission, Hokage-sama?" Kurenai asked, and Minato raised an eyebrow in wonderment, though his smile never wavered. "Are you doubting your team's abilities, Kurenai?" Minato teased, and Kurenai shook her head. She was about to say something, but Minato beat her to it. "Very well then. Not that I mind getting another mission, but what are you doing here?" Kiba asked, and Kurenai leveled him with a light glare. Kiba's eyes shifted to the ground under him, and Minato laughed as he focused his gaze on the scolded boy. "I needed to get out of that cramped office, so I came to personally deliver your mission to you." Minato turned his gaze back on Kurenai. "Unless, your sensei doesn't think you're capable enough to complete the mission." Team 8 looked at their sensei with an inquiring expression, and Kurenai's sweat dropped. "It's not that I'm doubtful, just curious as to why us," she answered, and Minato shrugged his shoulders nonchalantly. "For the past 2 months, your team has been completing D-rank missions without complaint. Think of this as a reward for making my life as a Hokage that much less troublesome." He laughed and watched as his laughter caused everyone to adopt a smile on their face. "Well, I should probably head back. I think I've procrastinated enough as it is." He waved to Team 8 as he left. Kurenai and Hinata bowed while Kiba was talking animatedly to Shino, who seemed as passive as ever. "Ah, to be young," he muttered as he headed back to work. When he left, Kurenai turned to her team and smiled. "All right team, this is a fairly simple mission. We're going to go to the Land of Fire's borders and investigate some suspicious activities. If we can handle the threat, we are allowed to confront the target and eliminate it. If it proves to be too much, we call for backup and run. No ifs, ands or buts. Is that understood?" Team 8 nodded their heads, and Kurenai sighed. "You are to go home and prepare for this mission. It will take at least a day to go there, 2 days to search the area, and then another day to return. Pack accordingly." Dismissed. "Hi," Team 8 shouted before turning and heading for their respective homes. Kurenai saw Kiba talking to both his teammates with so much life, waving his arms around and smiling like a child at a toy store. Hinata giggled, and even though Shino didn't show it, Kurenai knew he was enjoying the companionship with his teammates. After watching them disappear from her line of sight, Kurenai headed for her home. Naruto ducked as he jumped back and stared passively at his sparring partner. He sighed, his mind occupied by his memories of the last 2 months. He was assigned to his team and was teamed with Kuretsuchi, Daichi and his sensei. He was somewhat surprised that Kuretsuchi was on his team, though he should have known better. Damn that old man. Kuretsuchi sat on the side of the training field, watching him and Daichi spar vigorously. She seemed so focused on him that Naruto felt a bit anxious. Why exactly was she staring at him like he was freaking Kami? Girls were weird. Pay attention, came the voice of Naruto's sparring partner. Naruto barely avoided a kick headed for his head but wasn't prepared for Daichi to spin and then send a kick to the chest. Naruto rolled and used the momentum from the kick to jump to his feet, just in time to see Daichi heading towards him. Taking out a kunai from his pouch, Naruto met Daichi in the middle and parried off the kunai Daichi took out earlier. Staring into his gray eyes, Naruto smiled as he easily pushed Daichi back and slammed his knee into Daichi's chin. Naruto waited passively as Daichi tried to catch his second wind. The boy Naruto stood over was easily a foot taller than him. He had short brown hair and wore a long-sleeved shirt that covered his hands, along with dark red pants and black shinobi shoes. Naruto took a sharp jump to the left as Daichi shifted his right arm and threw a kunai at Naruto. Having easily dodged Daichi's kunai, Naruto took out more kunai and tossed them at his fallen comrade, sparring partner. Daichi jumped to his feet and leapt back, away from the kunai's destination. He held back a gasp when he saw Naruto appear behind him with a kunai positioned at the small of his back. Nice move, Daichi said as he stared back at Naruto with a smirk. Naruto responded with a smirk of his own and pushed Daichi forward. Not bad Naruto, Naruto turned to his sensei. Even though Onoki, Han and Roshi trained him in the last 6 years, he had also received guidance from his sensei. He looked up to him, being a Jonin sensei at such a young age. He was only 16. Your head still seems to be in the clouds, but as long as you avoid getting distracted, you'll define in future missions, Thanks, Deidara sensei. Deidara smirked at his charges. He was wearing the standard outfit of an Iwagakure shinobi. When Naruto first met Deidara, he was surprised to see that he had blonde hair. Naruto touched his own hair. He decided to let it grow out and return to its natural blonde color. It was an odd look, but Naruto had to get used to it. It was his way of rebelling against the old man. Besides, it wasn't all that bad. It sort of made him look related to his sensei. Deidara clapped his hands once and his eye crinkled as his smile widened. I got a sort of surprise for all of you. His team groaned. If it's another clay sculpture of us, no thanks, I have enough at home. Kuretsuchi said as she held her arms up in rejection, but Deidara laughed. No, it's nothing like that, but you could at least pretend you like my art, Deidara joked and Kuretsuchi shook her head with a soft smile. The mission is almost over, we'll be heading home soon. Naruto smiled. Yes, this boring mission is almost over. He shouted with glee and Kuretsuchi and Daichi laughed at his energetic cheer. All we have to wait for is the Hoshikage's reply and we're done. Deidara continued. While we wait, practice on your evasion skills, Deidara said as he created a couple of clones and they stood on both sides of him. Naruto, come with me, I need to speak with you. Naruto nodded as the 2 Deidara clones ran past him and towards the remaining 2 charges. Naruto followed Deidara, who led him to the far side of the training ground. What is it, Deidara-sensei? Naruto asked as Deidara faced him with a smile laced in his lips. There's a jutsu I want to teach you, He answered bluntly and Naruto smiled at the prospect of learning a new jutsu to add to his arsenal. However, his joy was overcome with his inquisitive nature. What about Kuretsuchi and Daichi? He asked and Deidara looked back at his team as they ran away from his clones. They can't handle this kind of jutsu just yet. His light blue eyes shifted back to Naruto, whose eyes never left his sensei. Their chakra reserves aren't at the level this jutsu requires. You, however, because of your tenant, Can probably perform this jutsu without breaking a sweat, Naruto's eyes lit up again. Okay, so what is it? Naruto asked, his energetic need to learn jutsu shining in his cerulean eyes. Deidara motioned Naruto to turn and focus on his two teammates. Naruto turned and saw Kuretsuchi narrowly dodging the clone's kunai while Daichi stared at his clone intently, anticipating its moves. Very good, Deidara shouted, loud enough so his team could hear him. The two clones stopped in their tracks and all four focused their attention on the blonde sensei. I want you two to spar with the clones. No ninjutsu, strictly taijutsu. Begin. Daichi and Kuretsuchi jumped back as the Deidaras ran at them with a kunai in each hand. So? Deidara shifted his eyes to Naruto, who was looking at him expectantly. What's the jutsu? What kind of clones do you think I made? The question threw Naruto off and he shifted his gaze back to the clones. He shrugged his shoulders. Rock clone? Deidara's smile widened, his eyes never leaving his charges. Just watch, Naruto kept his eyes on Deidara before switching to the clones. His eyes narrowed. Their movements and characteristics weren't different from the rock clone. That is, until Daichi managed to land a solid punch on the clone's chin. Naruto's eyes widened when the clone just exploded and left a cloud of smoke behind. Daichi blinked in surprise, having expected the clone to crumble into pieces of rock. With his eyes in danger of popping out of his head, Naruto could only stare at his sensei, who laughed at his expression. That is called the Shadow Clone Jutsu. Deidara answered Naruto's unasked question. A useful jutsu, better than the Rock Clone Jutsu. When the clone expires, its memories and any remaining chakra is sent back to the original. Deidara said as he tapped his temple. So why teach it to me? Naruto asked and Deidara raised an eyebrow. Do you not want to learn it, Naruto shook his head feverishly. Then let's get started, Deidara watched as Naruto smirked with confidence as his clones were successfully pushing his teammates to their limits. The boy was a genius, easily learning the jutsu in under 2 hours and even summoning about 20 on his first successful attempt. All right, stop, Deidara called out and the Narutos froze in their place. Daichi and Kuretsuchi let out an inaudible sigh of relief as Daichi promptly fell on his back. Oh Kami, thank you for showing mercy. Naruto chuckled as he dispersed his clones and felt the clones' memories rush into his mind. He flinched, but it was nothing he couldn't handle. He turned his attention back to Deidara. Team training is over, good job, Deidara said. You can do what you like, so long as whatever it is you do doesn't give you a bad name. Hi, sensei, his team replied. Now if you'll excuse me, I'll go catch up on some sleep and you all should too. We're heading out first thing in the morning, Deidara said as he disappeared and Naruto turned to his teammates. I'm hungry, let's get some ramen, Datbeo. Naruto said and Kuretsuchi groaned while Daichi rolled his eyes. What? You're always eating ramen boy. Kuretsuchi answered, a bit irritable. Daichi nodded in agreement. Don't you ever get tired of that stuff? He asked earnestly and Naruto looked flabbergasted. How could anyone ever get tired of ramen? Naruto asked, truly befuddled. It's only the best food on the planet. Kuretsuchi groaned. She had come to expect comments like that from her blonde teammate. Daichi just rolled his eyes again, but all three were smiling. In spite of their needling and teasing, they enjoyed one another's company immensely and, if asked, all three would claim the other two as friends. Oh, all right, let's get something to eat, the girl said, glaring at Naruto before adding, but no ramen. Naruto groaned and rolled his eyes. Daichi chuckled and patted him on the back. Hey, Naruto, don't forget, you've got your private stash with you. I saw you pack it, he said. Naruto's eyes brightened as he remembered Daichi was right. He did have about 24 small cups of instant ramen with him. He always packed that when he was going anywhere. All right, I guess I can go a meal without ramen, for you guys sake, he said, giving them his trademark grin. Kuretsuchi smiled at Naruto, knowing what he was up to, but flattered by his words nonetheless. Come on, you two, she said. Let's see what we can find to eat around here. Naruto and his team had found a small restaurant on the edge of the village and were enjoying their tea at the moment. Naruto hadn't seen anywhere to get ramen anyway, and this place seemed nice enough, so he was satisfied. Kuretsuchi liked it because it was one of those places that seemed to always have lit candles on every table and very little light otherwise, This made for a very private and, in her mind, romantic atmosphere. She blushed lightly at that thought. Naruto noticed Kuritsuchi blushing and wondered why, but he shook it off. He and Daichi sat on one side of the table they'd been shown to, Kuritsuchi on the other. Naruto found her staring at him again and once again felt a bit anxious because of it. What in the world was she staring at him like that for? Kuritsuchi, why are you staring at me? Naruto, tactless as ever, asked. She blushed at being caught and tried to say that she wasn't, but all she could manage was a series of unintelligible sounds. Naruto was even more confused than before. Daichi, realizing what was going on, burst out laughing. Now Naruto was totally lost. First Kuritsuchi was staring at him earlier while he was sparring with Daichi, then she was staring at him here at their table, and now Daichi was laughing uproariously for no apparent reason. Naruto, frustrated with his confusion, turned and glared at Daichi. "What is so funny?" he asked, annoyed. This only made Daichi laugh all the harder, to the point he was almost falling off his chair. Naruto folded his arms and humphed in irritation. Kuritsuchi, who was still stammering, finally stopped and began giggling hysterically at the, to her, very cute pout Naruto put on in his frustration. Even knowing it was in large part because of her, she couldn't help laughing herself. It didn't take long for Kuritsuchi and Daichi's laughter to become infectious. Naruto finally lost his pout and began laughing as well, even though he wasn't sure why, really. By the time their food arrived, all three were smiling and talking lightly about their mission and about going home the next day. "This is far enough," Kurenai said as her team stopped behind her. "We'll set up camp and continue in the morning." Team 8 nodded as they set their packs down and began to set up camp. Hinata took out her tent, but before she could start to set it up, she felt Kiba's hands go over hers. "Don't worry about setting up the tent, I'll do it for you." He smiled and Hinata blinked. She shook her head in amusement and released the tent. "Thank you, Kiba-kun." Kiba's cheeks gained a pink tint to them as he was exposed to Hinata's charming smile. He looked away and Hinata blinked again. "Are you okay?" she asked, and Kiba nodded his head and smiled back at her. Seeing him smile was enough for Hinata, so she turned her attention to her sensei, who was leaning against a tree, lost in her thoughts. "Kurenai-sensei?" Kurenai looked at Hinata with a questioning gaze. "Yes, what is it?" Hinata turned to Kiba and then Shino while they set up the tents. "Is there something I can do?" she asked with a smile. Kurenai hummed to herself before returning Hinata's smile. "How about you go find some firewood?" Hinata nodded her head and with a skip to her step, she went deeper into the forest. While she collected the firewood, she hummed a soft song, enjoying nature in all its glory. Looking skyward, she saw a clear blue sky just starting to turn pink with the evening and a brilliantly shining sun, both enjoying the luxury of being uninterrupted by blemishes. However, Hinata knew there was probably about an hour before the sun would leave and night would take its place as ruler of the sky. A breeze flew past Hinata and she took the time to just stand there and take in the scent of nature that came along with the breeze. She let out a deep breath and continued to collect firewood with an even wider smile. Off in the distance, a figure watched Hinata vigilantly with a cynical smile on his face. He slowly sneaked up behind Hinata and was about to cover her mouth with a cloth in his hand when she suddenly turned around and landed a solid palm to the man's stomach. The man's eyes widened before he was engulfed in smoke and replaced with a log. Hinata dropped the firewood in her hands and fell into her battle stance, her Byakugan active and her senses on alert. She gracefully avoided a kunai aimed for her stomach and took out her own kunai. She deflected another kunai and then another before she faced her attacker as he ran towards her. He thrust his kunai forward, but Hinata turned her body at the last second, getting him close enough for her to drive her fingertips into his left arm. She sent chakra through her tips and the man winced as he felt his arm losing some feeling. He jumped back and held his left arm with his right. He glared at Hinata before shifting his left arm up and started to make hand signs. He sucked in his breath and then released a huge tidal wave. Hinata's eyes widened as she saw the giant wave head for her. It hit her and the man smirked under his mask. The jutsu wouldn't kill her, but hopefully it would knock her out. His right eyebrow rose a few inches when the water over her began to expand until all that was left was a spinning dome of water and chakra. Hinata stopped her technique, facing her attacker with cold lavender eyes. Water droplets surrounded her before she disappeared in a blink of an eye. The man ducked under Hinata's roundhouse kick and jumped back when she spun on her heels and tried to hit him with a double palm to the chest. Suddenly, Hinata found herself surrounded by 5 men dressed all in black. She defended against 3 of the men successfully, causing them to turn into water and fall to the ground. The other 2, however, gave her a harder time as they seemed faster than the others. She parried a punch from one clone and then kicked it in the chest, but the other managed to grab her right arm and slam her into a nearby tree. She cried out in pain but retaliated quickly by shoving her elbow back and making it land on the clone's chest. With the chakra running through her elbow, she was able to disrupt the clone and cause it to crumble into the ground before returning to its natural element. With her Byakugan, she saw the last clone heading for her before jumping into the air. Before it could reach her, however, she spun. "Kaiten!" she shouted, and the clone collided with the spinning dome of chakra, dispersing it. She stopped, the water from the clone's death still over her. "Water style. Water prison jutsu." The man shouted, and Hinata's eyes widened when she was trapped in a dome of water. She looked behind her and saw the man smiling arrogantly under his mask. "I finally have you, Hyuga," the man said. Hinata glared at him while she began to panic and began to feel claustrophobic inside the water prison. She was losing oxygen, and it was only a matter of time before she lost consciousness. Before she did, though, she saw the man remove his mask and shivered at seeing his sinister smile. After the 3 of them ate, they all made their way back to camp. Kuritsuchi crawled into her tent and was asleep within moments. Naruto and Daichi entered their tent as well. The 2 sat and talked a short time. Then Daichi lay down and fell asleep as well. It was about then that Naruto had a sudden surge of claustrophobia. He had no idea what it meant, but he knew he couldn't stay there in the tent any longer. He crawled out of the tent silently and made his way to a nearby clearing to get some training done. He made a handful of clones and began training with them. As he did feel a little better, but something was still nagging at him. Something wasn't right, he could feel it. He just had no idea what it was. Shaking off this foreboding feeling, Naruto returned his attention on his training. During his training with his team, he would occasionally be found among his clones, and either Kuritsuchi or Daichi would try to attack him. He smiled as he remembered instinctively replacing himself with a clone. He remembered Kuritsuchi cursing her luck and admitting that she thought she had the original. At the time, Naruto laughed, telling her that she should work on her detection skills. But if he were honest with himself, he'd admit that she would have landed a hit, or close to one, if he hadn't replaced himself with a clone. That's what he's doing now, practicing to replace himself among his clones. Of course, it wasn't that hard to do, but he wanted it to be second nature. After making sure he got the hang of it, he then divided his clones into 2 groups. One to replace himself with and another to attack him, to simulate an actual battle. After some time, he chuckled tiredly as he fell flat on his back and let his eyes rest for a minute while the sound of the night entered his ears. Compared to the nightlife in Iwa, every living creature was awake out here. Wiping sweat from his brow, Naruto sat up and looked up at the sky. The moon looked beautiful as always, and the stars shone dully over the dark sky. Unknown to him, a pair of eyes were also staring at the moon. Tears flowed down her cheeks as Hinata's lavender eyes blinked away the stray tears. She closed them and whimpered under her gag. More tears escaped their imprisonment as she thought of her previous life being thrown away by her kidnapper. She hoped that Kami would send someone to save her, anyone. She blinked before her eyes became cold. She grew frustrated with herself, hating that fact that she was just crying, feeling sorry for herself, and wishing for someone to save her. She was a Hyuga, and not just any Hyuga, the Hyuga clan's heiress. She had enough skill to get herself out of this mess, and when the opportunity presented itself, she would take advantage of it. For the moment, Hinata had to be patient. Kiba sniffed the air for the 1000th time, but still he picked up no scent. He growled, frustrated that Hinata's scent just suddenly vanished. That doesn't happen, it shouldn't have happened now. So why did it happen? Kiba turned to his sensei, who walked and held herself with control and had a passive expression on her face, but Kiba knew better. Kurenai was the only kunoichi Hinata really bonded with, and vice versa. This was affecting Kurenai more than she let on. It was hurting her not knowing where her surrogate daughter was. "We need to head back." This threw Kiba for a loop. "What?" he shouted as Shino appeared beside Kurenai. "We have no leads. We can't find her no matter how hard we try. With all this water, any scent left behind is erased now. We need to return to Konoha and report this in." Kurenai explained, but she saw that she wasn't getting through to Kiba. "If you really want to help her, you need to believe me and come back to Konoha with us." Kurenai-sensei's logic is sound, Kiba. Shino added, hoping to persuade his friend to think reasonably. Kiba looked away from his remaining teammates, not wanting to admit that they were right. "It feels like we're abandoning her," Kiba muttered solemnly after he bowed his head. Kurenai felt the same, as did Shino, but they both knew that they were no help to Hinata now. They needed to go back home so they could send experienced tracking Nen. "We feel that, too, but this is the best course of action," Kurenai said, and Shino nodded in agreement. Kiba looked at them again before closing his eyes and nodding his head. "Fine." Kurenai sighed and turned her back to them. "Let's go," Kurenai said before turning and sprinting away. Shino hesitated to follow right after, taking the time to glance at his comrade. He was looking around, taking last-minute sniffs and observations before he had to leave. Akamaru rubbed his head against his owner, trying to get him to go after his sensei. After a defeated sigh, Kiba turned and nodded his head to Shino. He nodded back and they followed after Kurenai, wanting to get to Konoha as soon as possible. "We'll find you, Hinata-chan, I promise," he murmured under his breath, getting a worried look on Akamaru's face. "Wake up," a rough voice said, and Hinata's eyes sprang open. She couldn't believe she fell asleep. "This isn't good. Now I don't know where we are or in which direction we've headed," she thought as she sat up, her arms and legs still tied up. She noticed that her arms and legs were still tied, but the gag was removed from her mouth. She stared angrily at her kidnapper as he searched through his pack. Finally, he took out a ration bar and quickly peeled back the wrapper and held the ration bar in front of her mouth. Hinata blinked, staring at the bar in confusion. "Eat," the man demanded, and Hinata looked at him again. She pouted and looked away with a scoff. The man growled, "You're not eating anything else." Hinata turned her cold eyes to the man. "I don't like to be fed, I can do it myself." Hinata hissed at the man with some pride. "I'm not a child," she added, and the man shook his head with some patience. "Fine." The man threw the ration bar at her lap and got up. He grabbed more rope from his pack and tied it around her waist before tying the other end to a nearby tree only 2 feet away. "I'm going to give you only one warning tonight. Try anything funny and I'll slice your throat open with the nails on my fingers. My clients would prefer a whole hyuga, but they'd accept it if I only bring your eyes if you catch my drift." The man threatened with a devilish gleam in his eyes, and Hinata knew, staring into them, that he'd keep his word. She nodded slowly, but her expression was still harsh. She didn't want him to know that his threat had shaken her to her core with fear. He untied her arms and stood back as he watched her grab the ration bar and examine it with a calculating stare. He wondered why her brow furrowed and she mumbled under her breath, but then he got the idea when she closed her eyes for a second and opening them again. "Forget it. Those are chakra-absorbing ropes tying you down," the man explained, taking out another ration bar. "I'll let that one slide, but the next one will be your last mistake." Hinata glared at the man before taking a bite out of the bar. It wasn't exactly a cinnamon roll, but she was too hungry to care. The two ate in silence, and when Hinata finished, she continued to glare at her kidnapper. "What?" he asked with irritation. "Why are you kidnapping me?" Hinata asked, and the man sneered. "Don't worry about it now," he answered offhandedly. Hinata just shook her head stubbornly. "Tell me," she ordered with an air of conviction, and the man closed his eyes. "It's my mission to kidnap a hyuga. It's just your luck that I ran into you and your team." His answer seemed carefree, as if he was talking about getting groceries at the store. "Any other questions?" Hinata hummed to herself. "Well, too bad, we need to keep moving." The man stood and without hesitation, firmly grabbed Hinata's hands and tied the rope around her wrists. She groaned at how tight he was tying the rope. However, before she could voice her pain, the man had the gag over her mouth again. He then untied the rope around the tree and her waist, rolled it up and put it in his pack. He turned to her and saw her glaring at him again. He smirked menacingly before landing a harsh kick to her midsection. She gasped under her gag and moaned in agony. The man could only laugh at her pained expression. "That was to show you that I will carry out my threat," he said as he grabbed Hinata by her short raven hair and pulled her to her feet with a harsh yank. "This is just for fun," he said as he picked her up and carelessly tossed her to his shoulder. He grunted and found his equilibrium before walking forward. Hinata yelled fiercely and incoherently, but the man only laughed. "Shut up." Hinata glared at the back of his head before sighing, making her body relax. Being patient was harder than she thought. The water felt fresh and cool on Naruto's face and hands. He drank a bit from it and sighed happily as he downed the reflecting pool's water. There was nothing better than drinking fresh natural water under a full moon. Besides ramen, of course, but that didn't need to be said. His stomach growled and he deadpanned, holding his stomach with his right hand. A thought popped in his mind and he smiled brightly as he ran to the knocked-down tree and picked up his pack. He brought it over to the river and stuck his hand in it, fishing around for something before yanking his arm out and taking out 3 cups of instant ramen in a pot. He began to fill the pot with water from the reflecting pool. He placed it down next to the pool and grabbed branches from random trees and piled them together near the pool. With quick hand signs, he summoned up his chakra to his mouth and spat out a small flame onto the branches. When the fire began to grow, he took out a camp grill and placed it over the fire. With his body shaking with eagerness, he placed the pot on the grill and waited impatiently for the water to boil. As he waited, he began to think of the old man again. His smile faltered as he wondered what secrets he was keeping from him. He stared absent-mindedly into the fire as it crackled and added extra light into the area. His smile returned when he snapped out of his thoughts and saw the water in the pot boiling. He grabbed 1 instant ramen and filled it up with the hot water and then set it down to fill the second cup. After filling the second and third cups, he waited for the water to cook the ramen and sighed. "This is taking too long," he whined as he stared at the cups, as if staring at them will cook them faster. He couldn't take it any longer, he had to eat the ramen now. As he reached down to grab his first ramen cup, he stopped just inches away and his ears twitched. He heard sounds that reminded him of muffled cries and groans. He closed his eyes before reopening them, his fox eyes scanning the area around him. After adapting to the dark, Naruto was able to make out movement to the left of him. He squinted his eyes and saw 2 people. One was upright and the other was slung over that one's shoulders. He heard muffled cries coming from one of the 2, most likely from the one who was being carried. Too curious for his own good, Naruto got up, climbed a tree and slowly tailed the 2 mysterious figures. The closer he got, the more detail he took in. He saw that the one holding someone on his shoulders was a man at least twice his age and a jonin at the most. He wore a black mask with a black jumpsuit. On his shoulders was a girl around his age. She had raven hair with lavender eyes and a cream-colored hooded jacket with a fire symbol on the upper right and left sleeves and navy blue pants. Her wrists and ankles were tied by what Naruto assumed was chakra-absorbing rope. Her mouth was gagged and had a trail of dry tears on her pale cheeks. He hated seeing any woman in distress. It was his thing, his flaw. If he could do anything to help a woman in any way, he would. Obviously, he made exceptions for women who stubbornly rejected his help or were clearly his enemy. Still, he knew this could lead to his death in the near future, but old habits die hard. The girl looked up and her eyes widened at seeing him. She moaned under her gag and Naruto's fist tightened. Naruto then stopped on his branch just as the man stopped in his tracks. His eyes narrowed, suspicious of the man's motives. He heard something creeping up behind him. Moving at the last moment, he narrowly avoided getting a kunai embedded into his back. The kunai scratched his left flank as he jumped down from the branch and landed in between his newest attacker and the man holding the girl. He stood side to side, quickly alternating from watching his attacker and the man holding the girl. "Who the hell are you?" the man asked, and Naruto's eyes landed on his attacker, who charged. With quickness given to him by training, Naruto ducked under his attacker's kunai and kicked his feet from under him. The attacker fell, and that was when Naruto noticed that he looked exactly like the other man. It's probably a clone, but what kind of clone? Naruto thought as he got on top of the clone without a beat and landed a solid punch on the clone's face. Naruto quickly got off the clone when he saw it burst into water and tried to engulf him. He turned his back to the puddle and faced the man. He pulled down his mask with his free mask and smiled sinisterly. "You're quicker than this girl was," he said, and Hinata moaned loudly, clearly offended by the comment. Naruto just shrugged. So, what are you doing with this girl? Naruto asked, his chivalrous attitude getting the best of him. Certainly doesn't look like you're escorting her home. The man smirked arrogantly. What makes you say that? He asked, and Naruto couldn't help but smile himself. It might have been the fact that she's tied up and being carried by you at night, Naruto mused with his right hand caressing his chin. But mostly, it's because you don't look like the escorting type. Not true, I'm escorting this girl somewhere right now. The man mocked with a fake hurtful expression on his face. You don't even know me. Naruto raised an eyebrow but his smile remained, he was clearly amused. Now why don't you beat it, brat? I'm busy at the moment. The man said before turning and walking away. Naruto took one look at Hinata and their eyes connected. He could see the rage in her eyes, along with disappointment and wonder. Sorry, Naruto said as he took a step forward. His voice made the man stop and face him. But I can't let you go without a fight. This seems too suspicious, Naruto declared, and the man's smirk returned tenfold. You're willing to die for someone you've never met before? He asked. Naruto took in a breath and sighed. This is something I just can't walk away from. Not if I want to live with myself afterward. Naruto answered, and the man slowly put Hinata to the side. If that's how it's going to be, the man said as he took out a kunai. Hinata was just staring at Naruto with wide eyes. She couldn't believe who she was looking at. It couldn't be, it wasn't logical. Could it be that the Yondaime Hokage's son had survived after all, just like he said? He hadn't told everyone, but because her father was close friends with Minato, he was told almost everything. Of course, the boy had shorter hair than the Hokage and whisker marks on his face, but he did look like a carbon copy of him. But his name, at the moment, Hinata couldn't remember Minato's son's name. It was on the tip of her tongue. Before she could come up with his name, her attention was torn from her thoughts as she watched the man make hand signs while accumulating a huge amount of chakra. Round 1, Naruto said as he watched chakra surround the man. Water style. Storm upheaval. The man shouted as water began to shoot down from the sky and head for Naruto. Making a quick hand sign and taking in a huge breath, Naruto let the wind in his lungs go and he was sent flying backwards, away from the falling water. He skidded to a stop and watched as the water drenched the soil under them. Running, both enemies met in the middle in a clash of kunai before the older was able to push the younger back. Naruto flipped back continuously as the man followed after him. Naruto stopped short of a flip and rushed forward, catching the man by surprise. Naruto landed a strong punch into the man's gut and sent him rolling back. Another hand sign later, Naruto was surrounded by smoke and the man was already on his feet. Without warning, 7 Narutos popped out of the smoke and ran towards the man. The man's eyes widened, but he regained his composure and defended against the clones with some trouble. He kicked one clone in the stomach, making it disperse before jumping away and making the tiger hand sign. 6 water clones ran at the remaining 6 shadow clones while a 7th water clone headed for the original Naruto, who stayed back. The Naruto in the back narrowed his eyes and appeared in front of the clone and sent a kick to its head. The water clone blocked it with his left arm and sent a straight jab at Naruto's chest. Naruto groaned before it blew up into a puff of smoke. The clone's eyes widened. Shadow clone jutsu. More clones appeared from the trees and ambushed the lone water clone. The clone had no chance, it was outnumbered 10-1. The clones easily disrupted the one water clone and went to join their brethren to defeat the other water clones while others went to deal with the original. While they did, the original Naruto climbed down a tree and sneaked over to Hinata. She saw him take out a kunai while eyeing her. She blushed, thinking he was staring at her body like a pervert. She was surprised when he ran the kunai through the rope and freed her arms and legs. He stared into her eyes, his eyes mere inches from hers, causing her blush to deepen. Get out of here, Naruto said, but before Hinata could ask any questions, he got up and went after the kidnapper who had dispersed the last clone. Making hand signs, Naruto sucked in his breath and let out a large ball of fire. It headed for the man, but he blocked it with a wall of water he summoned beforehand. Steam surrounded the battle, but that didn't stop Naruto from charging through the steam and using his fox eyes to locate the man as he tried to make water clones to surprise Naruto. Wind style. Divine wind. A gust of wind originated from Naruto's mouth, blowing away the steam, and then formed into tornadoes that tore up the ground as they headed for Naruto's attacker. The man's eyes widened and he began to yell as the tornadoes tore at his sides. Naruto wasn't surprised when the man turned into water, but he wasn't expecting him to appear behind him and kick him behind his back. Naruto was sent flying into the reflecting pool. Naruto popped his head out of the water, taking in a breath and shaking the excess water from his hair. Water style. Water prison jutsu. Naruto cursed as he was trapped in a dome of compressed water. The man laughed as he held the water prison with his left hand. How ironic. This is how I captured the girl you were trying to save. Now you're going to die and she's still coming with me, he said with a devious smirk on his face. 8 trigrams 64 palms. A feminine voice roared from behind the man. He growled as he released Naruto from the prison to avoid getting hit by Hinata. Hinata glared at the man as she stood beside Naruto. Naruto looked up at her with a questioning look before seeing something reflecting from her neck. Is that a forehead protector? He thought as Hinata moved to where the man stood on top of the reflecting pool and began assaulting him with chakra-powered fingertips and palms. The man was fast and knew some water jutsu. Hinata guessed he was a Jonin. She didn't stand a chance against the man, but with the boy who saved her, maybe they could defeat him together, even if he was from Iwa. Naruto ran on all fours up to the man and swiped his claws at him. The man saw it coming and accordingly dodged with a jump to the left. He smirked at Naruto's failed attempt until he felt his left side get 3 long cuts coming from his chest down to his waist. He growled and jumped away from the 2 genin. You brat, he snarled at Naruto, who smirked in an animalistic manner. How did you do that? He barked. Wind chakra, was Naruto's response before he charged again. Hinata was right behind him, backing him up. Don't get cocky. The man jumped and slammed his hands on the surface of the water. Water style. Mouth of a serpent. As the man uttered the jutsu's name, a giant column of water appeared behind him. It changed into a large water serpent and engulfed Naruto in a single gulp. Hinata watched in surprise as the serpent changed into a river that carried Naruto away into the forest. Pay attention. Hinata blinked as a tidal wave swallowed her up and pushed her into a tree. The force of the hit caused her to lose her breath and had her on all fours, trying to catch her second wind. Her vision blurred for a second and her brain was pounding against her skull. She moaned in pain when a hand shot out, grabbed Hinata by her neck and raised her to his eye level. The man ripped Hinata's forehead protector from her neck and tossed it aside. You bitch, the man hissed as he tightened his hold. Hinata squinted her eyes in pain as she held on to the man's wrist. I told you I'd kill you and take your eyes. The man laughed insanely as he propped his free hand's index and middle finger over Hinata's eyes. She squirmed under his hold as she tried to free herself. It can't end here. It's still not my time. Hinata's mind shouted in rebellion. She would not blindly follow fate and destiny's words. She would fight till the very end. Suddenly, a hand made of red chakra grabbed the man by his waist, shooting forward into the water, making the man's back crash against the bottom of the pool. The hand retracted back to Naruto, who panted. He smirked as he walked back to Hinata's side, who was kneeling and rubbing her neck. You all right? He asked, his eyes not leaving the reflecting pool. Hinata nodded and stood. Naruto was about to say something, but his eyes landed on something near the pool and he gaped. Hinata soon noticed his expression and raised an eyebrow. What is it? Hinata asked, a bit thrown off by her own stutter. She hadn't stuttered since she was 8. In a blink of an eye, Naruto appeared near the edge of the reflecting pool and knelt. Why? Tears appeared in his eyes as he held his fallen ramen cups. They were innocent bystanders. Hinata's sweat dropped. She walked up to Naruto slowly. While she did, Hinata was unaware of the moisture in the air slowly coming together over her. Water needles appeared over the two as the kidnapper smiled sinisterly from under the water. Naruto, however, could sense the extra moisture in the air. He turned and saw the needles in the air. He quickly replaced himself with Hinata as the needles moved to pierce her. Gah! Naruto's eyes widened as he felt the water needles pierce him from every side. Blood flowed through his mouth, but he spat it out and gasped, his breathing starting to become more labored. Are you okay? Hinata asked as she knelt beside Naruto, who was staring at the ground with blank cerulean eyes. The water needles dispersed and flowed out of his wounds only to be replaced by his blood. Naruto's eyes closed and he fell on his face. Hey, that brat is dead. Hinata gasped as she looked up and saw the man standing passively over the pool. You should have ran away when you had the chance. A smirk appeared on his lips as he slowly made his way towards them. Hinata stood in front of Naruto and fell into her gentle fist stance. Stop right there, Hinata shouted, glaring at the man with her Byakugan active. The man ignored her as he continued to get closer to her and Naruto. Her muscles tensed. She couldn't do much to harm this man. His power and skills were above hers. She would most likely die before she could successfully land a hit on him. He was in her face a second later and kicked her back. She rolled back and flipped to her feet only to see her kidnapper grab Naruto and toss him into the pool. The last thing Naruto saw before he lost consciousness was the moon's image rippling from under the water. Kushina sat up, gasping for air and holding her neck with her right hand. A sudden rush of oxygen filled her lungs and she found herself panting heavily, forcing her lungs to accept the air and expelling her breath. That dream felt too real, Kushina thought. She wiped the sweat from her brow and took the time to catch her second wind. When she did, she lazily threw the blanket back, revealing creamy legs which she swung over the edge of the bed and got up. She only wore black satin panties and a black tank top. She gracefully floated to the bathroom and straight for the sink. She turned it on and splashed cold water on her face. She sighed and propped herself up with her arms. She needed to see Minato. She needed to talk to him now. And she knew exactly where he'd be at this time. Kushina found Minato exactly where she thought he'd be, in the same position as she pictured. His head was drooped forward, his shoulders hunched and his arms still as they remained on his side as he stood in front of a large stone. In his right hand a photograph, but it was too dark to see what picture was on it. It didn't matter though, Kushina knew whose picture it was. She slowly made her way towards him, her posture and demeanor solemn. When she stood only a few feet from him, his body shivered and he leisurely turned to face her. He stopped when his sad azure eyes rested on his wife and he couldn't help but smile. Kushina had to smile as well, mostly because she noticed a bit of life shine in Minato's otherwise dull eyes when he saw her. She hugged him from behind and rested her head on his shoulder blades, nuzzling them affectionately while she hummed comfortingly and groggily. Shouldn't you be asleep? Kushina could feel his body slightly vibrate because of his voice and she moaned tiredly. I should, she answered, half her mouth muffled by his back. He chuckled with slight mirth. Another dream? He asked and felt her nod. What happened? He waited patiently as he let his wife collect her thoughts and verbalize them. He was drowning, sinking deeper into the water but the water was red, like blood, but I could tell it wasn't. His eyes were glassy and lifeless and his body was covered with cuts and bruises. Then, she paused, chewing her lower lip and causing Minato to turn and hug her with all his might without squeezing the air from her lungs. It's okay, take your time. His words comforted her more than she thought they would as she sighed and shivered under his hold. Out of nowhere, the Kyuubi comes from the abyss and swallows Naruto whole. Tears stained Minato's shirt but he didn't notice and even if he did, he wouldn't care. He looked so young, she added with her voice quivering. Minato silenced her with a tighter embrace and a soft hum. It was just a dream, Minato assured her, rubbing her back softly. Kushina blinked and looked up at Minato, some fight sparking in her violet eyes. That's just it, Minato, I don't think it's just a dream. Her voice sounded stronger as she spoke and Minato could only wonder why. They both had a small feeling that Naruto was still alive but for whatever reason, they never went in depth. Seemed like the time had come. What do you mean? He asked her innocently and she looked to her right, some embarrassment in her eyes accompanied by a pink tint to her cheeks. You're going to think I'm crazy. Minato raised an eyebrow, noticing her reluctance to speak her mind. He shook his head. There are millions of reasons why I should think you're crazy, he chuckled at seeing the glare she gave him. But I don't. Now tell me. She sighed. Maybe he is alive. Minato could hear the conviction backing up her words and he smiled. Actually, I'm willing to bet anything that he is. Kushina was a very strong woman, Minato knew this. She was proud to be one and had no problem catching up with any male that challenged her success. Overall, she was a fortress, strong, powerful, defensive and hard to overcome. However, there were times when she seemed like a damsel in distress. Minato could count the number of times she's played that role with one hand. For her to show vulnerability was as common as a lunar eclipse. Now was one of those uncommon times. As he stared into her eyes, he saw desperation and vulnerability dancing in them. Me too. His response seemed to be what Kushina wanted to hear because her eyes lit up. But for now, we have to be patient. One day, Kushina-chan, we'll see him again. His azure eyes looked up at the moon and he smiled. And when that day comes, we'll be a family again. Kushina just stared at him with love and a bit of disbelief. How can you be so sure? Her voice brought Minato's eyes back to her. His eyes crinkled as his smile widened. He has Uzumaki and Namikaze blood. He's alive out there. That much I can be sure of. Tears accumulated in Kushina's eyes just as she smiled happily and hugged him with all she had. He returned the gesture and stared back at the large stone he was staring at before. Just under the name, Hiruzen Sarutobi, was a name dear to his heart. The words, Naruto Namikaze, disappearing from the stone reflecting the moon's light. Naruto opened his eyes, his vision blurry and vague. It didn't matter though, even if his vision was perfect, all he would see is water. Not just any water either, the water had a dark red shade to it. His mind was scattered, his thoughts rushing left and right, each hazy and alien. After taking the time to compose himself, Naruto noticed that he wasn't sinking but was actually rising to the surface of the red water. He blinked and noticed another strange fact: he was breathing even while he was underwater. He just waited until his head and the rest of his body surfaced and he saw that 3 walls surrounded him from all sides except for his right. The room was spacious and even the ceiling disappeared in the shadows. There was a red light coming from somewhere but Naruto couldn't see from where exactly. To his right were metal bars, continuously stretching down into the water and up to the ceiling. On the center bar was a note that read, "Seal." "Why am I not surprised?" droned Naruto as his eyes stared into the darkness. His body slowly floated to the bars and he continued to stare into the dark. He didn't flinch when red eyes suddenly popped out of nowhere, nor did he blink when 3 nails 10 times his size tried to pass the bars and rip him to shreds. "Still hostile? I'm guessing you still don't like me?" A growl echoed through the room and Naruto took that as a yes. "You brat," an angry, rough voice shouted from inside the steel bars. "Set me free. I am done being your battery." Naruto shook his head. "No can do, I still need you." Naruto denied as he sat up and rolled his shoulders to get rid of the crick in his neck. "Speaking of which, I need some of it now." Naruto got to his feet and walked over to the cage and touched it with his right hand. The steel felt cold under his palm but Naruto paid no mind to it as he saw the Kyuubi's red chakra start to go up his arm and surround him. He could feel adrenaline pump in his veins and his heart begin to race as his eyes changed from cerulean to crimson in the blink of an eye. His eyes widened as he was hit with a sudden fit of coughs, causing him to double over. He clutched for his heart as he tried to catch his breath. "Fool!" the chakra fox sneered as he watched Naruto compose himself. "Serves you right, you know you're at your limit." Then, the Kyuubi made a vague gesture with his shoulders, almost like a shrug. "It's not like I care, though. I enjoy seeing you suffer." Naruto sneered at the Kyuubi and reared his right fist back and punched the bars. The bars vibrated and it sent a high-pitched tone through the room. The Kyuubi winced and growled. "Shut the hell up." Naruto growled as he pushed himself off the bars and walked towards the opposite side of the room. A door suddenly appeared and Naruto stepped over the threshold. Before he left the Kyuubi's sight, he turned and gave the beast one last passive look. He shook his head and left, the door disappearing, with the Kyuubi glaring at another wall. He growled as he thrashed against his jail with fury for his host. Releasing the anger in him, the Kyuubi stopped and let the remaining aggression in him go by growling once in a while. Suddenly, his face changed to a devious smile and he started to chuckle as he closed his eyes and retreated into the darker side of his cage. "When you return, my host, there will be a surprise waiting for you." His voice echoed and his chuckle quickly turned into a full-blown maniacal laughter. Naruto's eyes popped open and his eyes were not looking up at the moon. They narrowed as he summoned up the Kyuubi's chakra, encircling him with the chakra. A violent cough escaped his lips but he ignored it as he readied his body for the upcoming fight. Round 2. "Come out, little Hyuga." Hinata panted as quietly as she could as she hid from her attacker. She tried to fight back, giving her all, and yet the man was able to survive all of it. She still had one jutsu she hadn't tried but it was still unsafe. She wasn't completely sure of her own abilities as she led on, more so when the jutsu was of her own creation. Hinata gasped when she heard water rushing, slowly becoming louder. She jumped and a wave of water tore at the tree she hid behind and she watched as it was washed away. Gotcha! Hinata gasped when her attacker grabbed her right arm and twisted it behind her back. Thought you could get away? The man asked while twisting her arm and raising it to painful levels. Hinata whimpered but not a gasp or cry of pain escaped her lips. She bit down on them, preventing her attacker from enjoying her pain. He snarled at her silence and with a sharp pull, he dislocated Hinata's arm from her shoulder, eliciting a loud yell from the Hyuga heiress. He released her arm and kicked her back, sending her to the ground. She clutched at her arm as tears flooded out of her eyes. She lay flat on her stomach, letting out occasional cries and howls of pain. The man walked up to Hinata, and with a sick smile, he stepped on her right shoulder. A sickening popping sound rang through the forest. "What's the matter?" the man said in mock worry. He grabbed her right shoulder and harshly turned her to her back, causing her to scream again. "Does it hurt that much?" Even in pain, Hinata wanted nothing more than to silence the man for good. She turned her head, not wanting to look at him as she held her arm. She failed to notice him take out a kunai and place it right over her heart until the tip of the kunai touched her skin. She didn't move after that. "Here, let me put you out of your misery." Hinata closed her eyes as the man reared the kunai back. He stopped short of thrusting the kunai into Hinata's heart when a sudden foreboding feeling caused him to shiver. He looked back at the reflecting pool to see bubbles. "He's not dead yet?" The man cursed as he returned to focus on Hinata and ending her life. Before he could even move his hand, evil tainted chakra filled the area and caused the man to gasp. "What the hell is this?" Hinata's eyes sprang open and she felt fear crawl into her heart. "This chakra, it isn't human." Suddenly, from under the attacker, a red chakra hand burst through the ground and grabbed the man. It shot up in the air before coming down and slamming him into the ground. Dust was kicked up and surrounded the man as the chakra hand retracted to the hole it came from. "What the hell?" The attacker drifted off as he held his head, hoping to stop his vision from shaking. He looked back at the reflecting pool and saw Naruto, in his demon cloak, standing over the water. His eyes were cold and hard as they stared at the man. Who the he? The man was cut off when Naruto started to chuckle. "Just who the hell do you think I am?" Naruto asked. "I'm Naruto, Naruto of the Blazing Gale, and I won't fall to you." Naruto raced down the gap between him and his attacker in a blink of an eye. The man wasn't able to respond fast enough as Naruto grabbed his neck and forced him deeper into the ground. The man grunted as he gripped Naruto's wrists. The man smiled and collapsed into a puddle of water. "Why do you continue fighting? She's a lost cause." Naruto turned and received a sharp punch to the face, sending him flying back. He righted himself and glared at the man who stood in his previous spot. "This is your last chance. Leave now and I'll spare your life." Naruto could see that the man was dead serious. He was willing to let Naruto walk out of this fight alive. He growled, "Don't underestimate me." Naruto shouted as he ran at the man again, with renewed energy and conviction. "Fire style. Running fire." He shouted as he spat out a stream of fire that surrounded the man. Making more hand signs, he sucked in a deep breath. "Wind style. Divine wind." Multiple tornadoes rushed out of Naruto's mouth and headed for his attacker. The tornadoes sucked up the fire and became tornadoes of flame as they assaulted the man from all directions. The man's eyes widened as he made fast hand signs and summoned up a wall of water to protect himself. Unfortunately for him, the first wave of flaming tornadoes collided with the water wall and blasted it away. The man landed on his butt and looked up in time to see the second wave of tornadoes clash and explode on impact. Water and dust was kicked into the air, blocking the man from Naruto's view. Naruto waited patiently for the dust to clear, and when it did, he didn't see his attacker anywhere. He looked around and the only other person he saw was Hinata, who was cradling her right arm while staring at him. He flipped away just as a rain of kunai came rushing towards him. He glared in the direction they came from, but he still saw no one. While he searched for the kidnapper, Hinata couldn't help but stare at Naruto. "That's the Yondaimi's son's name. Naruto Namikaze." Hinata thought with her heart pounding against her chest. "This can't be a coincidence. Come out, you coward." "Dat Bayo." Naruto shouted with anger and adrenaline. Hinata's sweat dropped. That sounds like something Kasan would say. Naruto? Naruto turned and was surprised to see his sensei staring at him with confusion. What happened, Deidara asked and Naruto looked around. He took the time to sniff the air and found that the man's scent wasn't anywhere near him. He growled and was about to find the bastard, but he collapsed to his knees in a fit of violent coughs. The Kyuubi's demon cloak receded and Naruto felt all his energy leave him. His eyes became glassy and his vision blurred as he fell on his face and lost consciousness. Deidara rushed to him and checked Naruto over. He wasn't going to die, but he needed to see a doctor. He heard a small voice groan and he looked up to see Hinata trying to sit up. "You okay?" he asked, and Hinata struggled just to nod. "Come on, I'll take you to the hospital along with my student, Deidara summoned a clone and the clone picked up Hinata while the original tossed Naruto to his shoulders. The clone could feel Hinata tense and he let out a small chuckle. "It's okay, you'll be healed in no time, Hinata just stared at him before turning her eyes to the unconscious blonde. "If you don't mind me asking." The clone tilted his head and hummed. "Who is that boy?" Hinata asked and the clone smiled in a brotherly fashion at Naruto. "He's Naruto, the clone said and paused to think. Although, he is trying to add, the Blazing Gale, to the end of his name. Not bad, but it'll be a while before it catches on." The clone shook his head and began to follow the original as they headed for the hospital. As they did, Hinata couldn't help but think of the boy who saved her. Naruto of the Blazing Gale? She smiled softly as drowsiness began to take her. Not bad. That's all for now. If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments.